Chapter 82. Ji Tianqing rode the carriage and left the city square, heading back to the Ji mansion. The carriage passed through several streets, but it suddenly stopped when it entered a tree-lined path. Puzzled, he lifted the curtain and was about to ask the coachman what was going on when he looked up and saw a woman in a white dress standing in front of the carriage. Although he could only see the back of the woman in the white dress and her long black hair that reached her waist, he could still recognize her. However, he recognized that the woman in the white dress was Yunyao just by looking at her slim back. Ji Tianqing hurriedly got out of the carriage and instructed the coachman, "Wait for me here. I'll be back soon." He walked behind Yunyao and asked with a smile, "Miss Yunyao, may I know why you're waiting for me here?" Yunyao turned around and looked at him. She said calmly, "I have something to ask you, but this isn't the place to talk. Come with me." After that, Yunyao led him away from the tree-lined path and entered a house not far away. The door of the house was tightly shut. The courtyard was old and dilapidated, and it was covered with weeds. It was obvious that no one lived here. The courtyard was silent. The two of them were not afraid of being disturbed or eavesdropped when they talked here. The two of them stood under a big tree in the courtyard. Yunyao then said to Ji Tianqing, "Congratulations on winning first place in the tournament. You will be my junior martial brother when you enter our sect." Ji Tianqing smiled faintly and cupped his hands towards her. "Then I'll thank senior sister here. In the future, I'll have to ask senior sister to guide me." Of course, he was just being polite on the surface. He didn't take it seriously. He understood that if he wanted to have powerful strength and a noble status, he could only rely on his own hard work. Moreover, he knew very well that Yunyao didn't stop him halfway to congratulate him for winning first place in the tournament. She must have something else to say. As expected, Yunyao looked at the black dragon sword in his hand. After pondering for a moment, she asked, "Junior brother, can you let me have a look at your sword?" Ji Tianqing's expression did not change, but his heart was secretly vigilant. No wonder she wanted to stop me halfway, so she was interested in my black dragon sword. Could it be that she saw through the secret of the black dragon sword? Thinking of this, he quickly smiled at Yunyao and declined, "Senior sister Yunyao, as the #1 genius of the Tianshan region, you are naturally knowledgeable and have seen all kinds of divine weapons. This sword of mine is just an ordinary sword. It can't even enter senior sister's eyes. How about this? My Ji clan makes a living by forging weapons. I'll go back to the mansion and get 2 swords for senior sister to look at." Before he could finish, Yunyao calmly rejected him. No need. Of course, she could see that Ji Tianqing did not want her to look at the black dragon sword and wanted to deliberately change the topic. However, she would not force Ji Tianqing and said with a calm expression, "Since junior brother is unwilling to part with it, then let's forget about it. In addition, I will be returning to the sect in 3 days. It will take at least half a month to reach the sect from the Qingyun kingdom. If you want to arrive earlier, you might as well travel with me." If it was an ordinary person, it would take at least half a month to reach the Sky Pillar sect. However, Yunyao could fly thousands of miles in a day on the spirit crane and return to the sect in 3 days. If he could ride the spirit crane with this peerless beauty to the Sky Pillar sect, how pleasant and enviable would that be? If it was anyone else, they would not refuse such good fortune. However, Ji Tianqing shook his head and explained, "Thank you for your kindness, senior sister, but I still have some matters to deal with at home. I will be delayed for a few days, so I won't be traveling with senior sister." Yunyao nodded slightly. "All right, then you deal with your family matters first. After dealing with the mundane matters, set off as soon as possible. Don't miss the deadline." "Thank you for your reminder, senior sister. Then I will take my leave." Ji Tianqing still maintained a smile, cupped his hands to her, and then left the dilapidated house. Yunyao looked at his back as he left, and the corners of her mouth suddenly evoked a very faint smile. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. "The more you try to hide it, the more certain I am," she murmured to herself before leaving the dilapidated house. Ling Mansion, in a small courtyard with a quiet environment. Madame Ling was sitting under a tree, looking at things and thinking of her daughter, Ling Yunfei's death. She kept wiping her tears. Ling Sihai sat beside her and comforted her in a low voice. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps came from the entrance of the small courtyard. A guard rushed into the small courtyard and shouted anxiously, "Family head. Something bad has happened." Ling Sihai immediately turned his head and angrily glared at the guard. He shouted, "What's the matter? Why are you so panicked?" The guard quickly came to his side and respectfully reporting to Master, "This subordinate just received news that the sky-bearing sex entrance competition has ended. Damn that Ji Tianqing, he actually defeated the little prince Ji Ling and entered the sky-bearing sect as first place in the competition." Suddenly hearing this news, Madame Ling also stopped sobbing. She stared in shock and anger and shouted, "What? That's impossible. That damn little bastard, how could he enter the sky-bearing sect and even win first place in the competition?" Ling Sihai also had an angry look on his face. He asked the guard in a deep voice, "Is this true?" The guard quickly nodded and said, "Of course it's true. The competition was held in the city square, and tens of thousands of people saw it clearly. Now the news has already spread in the imperial city." Ling Sihai also knew that this matter couldn't be fake. He was so angry that his face turned ashen and his fists cracked. Ji Tianqing, that little bastard. He entered the sky-bearing sect as first place in the competition, so he will definitely be heavily nurtured by the sky-bearing sect. Now that he has the identity of a disciple of the sky-bearing sect, it will be difficult for us to make a move on him. Madame Ling was also so angry that her face turned cold, and her eyes surged with an ominous glint. Even if Ji Tianqing becomes a disciple of the sky-bearing sect, we can't let him go. No matter what, I will kill him and let him be buried with our daughter. She frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, she thought of someone and had an idea. "Master, I have an idea. We can ask you for help and let him deal with Ji Tianqing." "Humph. Ji Tianqing, that little bastard, does he think that he can save his dog life by entering the sky-bearing sect?" Wishful thinking. Ling Sihai frowned in puzzlement and subconsciously asked, "Which you, Madame Ling quickly explained, "Which you, can it be? Of course it's Feifei's cousin, Jian Yu." "Jian Yu?" Ling Sihai was startled for a moment before suddenly coming to a realization. "That's right. How could I have forgotten about him? Jian Yu is also a martial arts genius. He entered the sky-bearing sect 3 years ago. Now, his position in the sect must be extraordinary. Madam, I will write a letter to you, now. I must deliver the letter to you, before Ji Tianqing arrives at the sky-bearing sect." Chapter 83. On the way back to the Ji mansion, Ji Tianqing was delayed by Yunyao. By the time he returned to the Ji mansion, it was already noon. At this time, the news of him defeating the young prince Ji Ling and winning first place had already spread throughout the imperial city. Everyone in the Ji mansion had also heard the news. Countless people were overjoyed and very excited. When Ji Tianqing stepped into the Ji mansion, the steward had already brought many Ji family members to respectfully wait for him. Seeing that the Ji family members were in high spirits, he casually said a few words and dismissed them. After returning to the cool breeze courtyard, he immediately sent a letter to the vice hall master, Mu Shan, to discuss matters. The entrance competition was over, and he had successfully won first place, becoming famous in one fell swoop. Now, it was time to resolve the Ji family's internal problems. A moment later, Mu Shan rushed into the courtyard like the wind and saluted him. "Greetings, young master." Ji Tianqing waved his hand, indicating for him to be less courteous. With a grave expression, he asked, "Mu Shan, is second elder in the mansion?" Mu Shan hurriedly reporting to young master, "Just a quarter of an hour ago, second elder and Ji Hao secretly escaped from the imperial city. However, this subordinate has been following young master's orders and has been secretly following them." Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows as a cold glint flashed in his eyes. It's just as I expected. I had long expected that Ji Rufeng and his son would escape. Now that I am the family head, I hold the power of the Ji family, I have won first place in the competition, and I have become a disciple of the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Rufeng can no longer do anything to me. I was just about to give the order to capture him and punish his crimes in public, but he fled in fear of punishment. Humph. Mushan hurriedly took out a stack of papers and a small jade bottle from his sleeve and handed them to Ji Tianqing. Young master, these are some criminal evidence that I found in the secret compartment of Second Elder's secret chamber. Please take a look. Ji Tianqing took the papers and jade bottle and carefully examined them. Those few slips of paper were the secret letters between Ji Rufeng and the young prince, Ji Ling, as well as the receipts for the secret weapon transactions. In the small jade bottle, there was still half a bottle of medicinal powder that had not been used up. It was the supplementary medicine for the energy-destroying powder. Ji Tianqing had long suspected that someone from the Ji clan had secretly poisoned his father, Ji Changkong. That was why his father was poisoned on the day the Ling clan came knocking on their door. Now that he saw this half bottle of medicinal powder, he finally confirmed that the person who poisoned him was second uncle, Ji Rufeng. The evidence is conclusive. Ji Rufeng, I'll make you pay with your blood this time. Ji Tianqing's face was filled with rage as he bellowed. He immediately ordered Mu Shan, leave a few experts behind to keep an eye on the managers in the mansion. Don't let them escape. Gather the men immediately. I will personally lead a team to hunt down Ji Rufeng. We absolutely cannot let him escape. Understood. Mu Shan cupped his fists and accepted the order. He immediately left the room to gather the experts of Shadow Sword Hall. Ji Tianqing also hurriedly left the Cool Breeze courtyard. He found a chasing wind horse and prepared to set off. Currently, his father was heavily injured and was in seclusion. He would soon be heading to the Sky Pillar sect. The Ji clan would have no one to oversee the situation. If Ji Rufeng made a comeback, no one in the Ji clan would be able to stop him. Therefore, Ji Tianqing had already made up his mind to eliminate Ji Rufeng no matter what. If this internal trouble was not eliminated, the Ji clan would never have a day of peace. A moment later, Ji Tianqing led Mu Shan and the 6 experts of Shadow Sword Hall out of the Ji mansion. The group left the imperial city and chased westward as fast as lightning. Every 2 hours, Mu Shan would receive a secret message from his subordinates using swift winged birds to learn about Ji Rufeng's whereabouts and news. Unknowingly, 6 hours had passed. The sun had already set and the curtain of night was about to fall. At this time, Ji Tianqing, Mu Shan, and the others had already chased for more than 300 miles. They were far away from the imperial city and had entered Yuzhou. Obviously, Ji Rufeng had also discovered that someone was chasing after him. Not only did he run for his life without stopping, but he also fled into the mountains in order to shake off his pursuers. 2 hours later, Ji Tianqing, Mu Shan, and the others finally caught up to Ji Rufeng. In the darkness of the night, on top of 1,000 Zhangtal mountain, Ji Rufeng, Ji Hao, and 4 other guards in leather armor were standing in the open space with their backs against each other in a defensive formation. The horses that the 6 of them rode had long been abandoned at the foot of the mountain. Ji Rufeng's appearance was somewhat disheveled. His clothes were soaked in sweat and his eyes were glaring angrily, flashing with a frightening light. Like the 4 bodyguards, he gripped his profound weapon saber and sword tightly and stared murderously at the Shadow Sword Hall experts around him. Ji Hao's face was ashen. He hid in the crowd with a frightened look in his eyes, trembling all over. 8 Shadow Sword Hall experts spread out and surrounded them, approaching step by step. Ji Tianqing strode into the field with Mu Shan and stopped 10 meters away from Ji Rufeng. He looked coldly at Ji Rufeng and shouted in a low voice, "Ji Rufeng, you're guilty of so many crimes. Do you still think you can escape?" Ji Rufeng stared at Ji Tianqing with a gloomy face. He pretended to be angry and shouted, "Ji Tianqing, I only went to Yuzhou to take care of family business. Why did you send people to kill me?" Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianqing immediately sneered and said, Ji Rufeng, you're about to die and you still want to play dumb? You sent assassins to assassinate me. According to the Ji family's rules, assassinating the family head's legitimate son is a capital offense. You wantonly destroyed the Ji family's foundation and secretly traded large amounts of profound weapon equipment with the young prince. This is also a capital offense. Also, you colluded with the Ling family and secretly poisoned the family head. You murdered the family head. This is also a capital offense. Ji Rufeng, you've committed 3 major crimes. No matter which one, I can kill you on the spot. Ji Rufeng's expression changed drastically. Deep hatred flashed through his eyes. However, he still refused to admit his crimes. He even quibbled, Ji Tianqing, this is only your side of the story. You want to punish me? Do you have any evidence? Without any evidence, on what basis did you send people from Shadow Sword Hall to kill me? You want evidence? Ji Tianqing sneered. He waved his hand and threw a stack of paper and a jade bottle in front of Ji Rufeng. This is the evidence. Open your dog eyes and look carefully. When Ji Rufeng saw the stack of paper and jade bottle, he didn't need to read the contents to know that he had been completely exposed. His expression became ferocious as he shouted in a venomous tone, Ji Tianqing, I underestimated you. Originally, today was supposed to be the day of your death. But I didn't expect that a piece of trash like you could rise again and defeat the young prince to take first place in the family competition. I really regret not killing you earlier. If you hadn't interfered, my plan would have been completed long ago. I would have taken back the family head position that should have belonged to me. Ji Tianqing's expression was cold as he shouted, Ji Rufeng. All these years, even though you've run amok and wantonly embezzled the Ji family's assets, my father still didn't do anything to you out of brotherly affection. My father treated you like a brother, but you repaid his kindness with enmity. Not only did you plot to usurp the family head position, but you also wanted to kill us father and son. You've committed a heinous crime. Death is not to be regretted. Tonight, I will clean house for the Ji family. Chapter 84. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Ji Rufeng laughed maniacally. He roared like a madman, bullshit. How am I inferior to your father? I'm the second son, and the position of patriarch should be mine. Why should I pass it to your father? It's your father, Ji Changkong, who took away everything that belonged to me. He's the one who deserves to die. Ji Tianqing frowned, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Ji Rufeng, you've lost your mind and your mind. Cut the crap. Take your head and accept your punishment. With that, he waved his hand and ordered Mu Shan, do it. Mu Shan accepted the order and leaped toward Ji Rufeng. He waved his sword, and cold light filled the sky. The 8 Shadow Sword Hall experts also attacked, surrounding Ji Rufeng's 4 guards. Instantly, sword light flashed within a 20-meter radius, and a fierce wind blew. The sword light brought with it a violent and fierce wind that spread in all directions, sweeping up the fallen leaves on the ground and sending sand and stones flying. The dazzling cold light illuminated the dark night. Ding ding dang dang, after a series of clanging sounds of swords colliding, the battle ended. Although Ji Rufeng's 4 trusted guards were at the first or second level of the mystic enlightening realm, they could not withstand the attacks of the Shadow Sword Hall experts. Both sides had only exchanged a few blows before the 4 guards were killed by the Shadow Sword Hall experts. They lay on the ground covered in blood, turning into corpses. Ji Hao was even more vulnerable. His chest had been pierced by a sword light in the chaotic battle, and he died on the spot. Ji Rufeng was still alive, but he was also covered in wounds. The sword in his hand had been snatched away, and Mu Shan had a sword pressed against his neck. Ji Tianqing walked in front of him and shouted with a gloomy face, Ji Rufeng, you can say your last words now. Ji Rufeng's blood-stained face revealed a sinister smile filled with resentment. Ha ha ha. Ji Tianqing. Even if I die here tonight, you and your father won't live for long. You'll be buried with me sooner or later. I'll wait for you in the Yellow Springs. Someone will avenge me. Ha ha ha. With that, Ji Rufeng laughed maniacally. Then go to hell. Ji Tianqing coldly shouted, waving his sword and piercing his throat. Ji Rufeng immediately stopped breathing. His eyes were still wide open as his body fell to the ground with a plop. The mountain peak fell into silence. The night wind blew, dispersing the smell of blood on the ground. Deal with these corpses. Ji Tianqing ordered Mu Shan before walking towards Ji Hao's corpse. Ever since he caught up with Ji Rufeng and his son, Ji Hao had been trembling in fear. He hadn't said a single word, which seemed somewhat abnormal. He had specially observed Ji Hao just now and realized that Ji Hao's build and height were somewhat different from what he remembered. Ji Tianqing could not help but suspect that there was something wrong with this Ji Hao. He came to the side of Ji Hao's corpse and used his sword to pry open the hair covering his face, carefully observing Ji Hao's face. After a while, Ji Tianqing suddenly noticed something and frowned. Mu Shan, check Ji Hao's body and see if he was in disguise. Mu Shan immediately understood what he meant and hurriedly squatted down to examine Ji Hao's face. He stretched out 2 fingers and searched Ji Hao's face for a while before ripping off a human skin mask. Instantly, a dark and ordinary face appeared in front of everyone. Ji Tianqing looked at the unfamiliar face with a cold glint in his eyes. He said hatefully, "It really is a substitute. Damn that Ji Rufeng, what a scheming old fox. He had already found someone to disguise himself as Ji Hao and fooled us all." Mu Shan knelt down on one knee in shame and apologized to Ji Tianqing. "Young master, it is my negligence. I was careless and was fooled by a substitute, allowing Ji Hao to escape. Young master, please allow me to redeem myself. I will immediately send people to investigate. We must capture Ji Hao." Ji Tianqing thought for a while and nodded. "This matter cannot be delayed. Send people to investigate immediately. Remember, capture him alive." "Yes, young master." Mu Shan cupped his fists and immediately ordered the experts of the Shadow Sword Hall to start the operation. After he passed down the order and arranged the men, the corpses on the mountain peak were also dealt with. Ji Tianqing led everyone away from the mountain peak and returned to the imperial city. The next day, noon, the Ji Mansion's main hall. Ji Tianqing sat on the seat of the patriarch. Today, he was going to clean up the internal problems and reorganize the Ji family. Mu Shan stood beside him with a sword in his hand, looking like a murderous god. On both sides of the main hall sat Grand Elder Ji Dajiang, for managers with different surnames, and a few elders and elders of the Ji family. Third Elder Ji Changhe and 5 other managers with the surname Ji were forced to kneel in the middle of the main hall by the experts of the Shadow Sword Hall. Ji Tianqing took out all kinds of evidence and listed the crimes of the 5 managers with the surname Ji. Then, he announced the punishment in front of everyone. Remove the 5 managers with the surname Ji from their positions and confiscate all their family assets. Then, all 5 of them will be expelled from the Ji family and their names will be erased from the genealogy. From now on, these 5 people would no longer be the powerful managers of the Ji family. They would be reduced to penniless paupers. Moreover, they would be expelled from the Ji family and their names would be erased from the genealogy. Even after death, they would not be able to enter the Ji family's ancestral hall. To them, this was undoubtedly the most reasonable punishment. Ji Tianqing's announcement was like a bolt from the blue to the 5 managers with the surname Ji. They were dumbfounded on the spot. After regaining their senses, the 5 managers beat their chests and stamped their feet. They repeatedly kowtowed and begged Ji Tianqing to be lenient and forgive them. There were even 2 managers who wailed in front of everyone and slapped themselves in front of Ji Tianqing to express their remorse. However, what happened in the main hall a few days ago was still vivid in his mind. How could Ji Tianqing forgive them? At that time, these 5 managers had helped Ji Tianqing seize power and put pressure on Ji Tianqing. How repulsive were their faces. Now that things had progressed to this point, even if they wept bitterly and begged for mercy and repented, Ji Tianqing would not be merciful. After dealing with the 5 managers with the surname Ji Tianqing dealt with the third uncle, Ji Changhe. Third elder Ji Changhe colluded with second elder Ji Rufeng to embezzle the Ji family's assets and fill their own pockets. They committed all kinds of evil deeds. Ji Changhe. Since you are my father's biological brother, I will give you a lighter punishment. From today onwards, Ji Changhe will be stripped of all his positions and will not interfere in any of the Ji family's matters. Furthermore, Ji Changhe will be imprisoned in the long bamboo courtyard. He will not be able to take a step out of the courtyard for the rest of his life. If Ji Changhe violates the above punishment in the slightest, he will be executed on the spot. After announcing the punishment, Ji Tianqing stared coldly at Ji Changhe and asked, Ji Changhe, do you have anything else to say? The current Ji Changhe did not have the arrogant and complacent attitude he had a few days ago. His hair was disheveled and he cut a sorry figure. His empty eyes were filled with despair and anger. He raised his head to look at Ji Tianqing and sneered with a sinister expression. Ha! Ji Tianqing, the winner is king and the loser is a bandit. I have nothing to say. I just didn't think that second brother and I would have underestimated you. You are only a 17-year-old youth, but your methods are more decisive and ruthless than your father's. Chapter 85. After dealing with Ji Changhe and the 5 Ji clan heads, the internal strife of the Ji clan was finally completely eliminated. Ji Tianqing had avenged himself and his father, and also completed his father's task of protecting the Ji clan's 100 years of foundation. Of course, the removal of the 2 elders and the 5 clan heads would temporarily affect the Ji clan's businesses and properties. Ji Tianqing did not have many people under his command, only the Shadow Sword Hall and the 4 clan heads with different surnames. He had no choice but to carry out his duties as the clan head, working hard every day for the Ji clan's businesses and properties, formulating various plans, and finding ways to restore the Ji clan's businesses. Unknowingly, 3 days had passed. In these 3 days, he was unusually busy. In order to quell the aftermath of the Ji clan's internal strife, it could be said that he was mentally and physically exhausted. Fortunately, the Ji clan's properties covered more than half of the imperial Qing dynasty, and there were many capable people under his command. He promoted a few trustworthy new clan heads, and formulated several plans and rules based on the Ji clan's current situation, and finally stabilized the Ji clan's turbulent situation. According to his estimation, the Ji clan would return to normal in at most a month, and would be as prosperous as before. Early in the morning, Ji Tianqing woke up and was washing up when Haner's voice came from outside his room. Eldest young master has just finished his closed-door training, and he wants you to see him. I'll go now. Ji Tianqing responded and quickly walked out of Qingfeng courtyard, heading towards his father's residence. When he arrived at Sanchong courtyard, Ji Tianqing just entered the room and saw his father sitting by the bed, talking to Mu Shan in a low voice. Seeing him enter the room, Ji Changkong immediately revealed a gratified smile and waved to him, Tianqing, come over quickly. Seeing that his father's complexion had recovered, Ji Tianqing felt a little comforted. He quickly went forward and bowed, asking with concern, Father, you've been in closed-door training for a few days, how are your injuries? Ji Changkong nodded slightly and said in a calm tone, the poison of the energy-destroying powder has been mostly removed. Father's injuries have stabilized, and there are no major problems for the time being. Only then did Ji Tianqing feel relieved. He smiled and said, Father, many things have happened in the manor while you were recuperating in seclusion. Let me tell you slowly. Ji Changkong shook his head and said with a smile, Tianqing, Mu Shan has told me everything that has happened in the past few days. I really didn't expect that you would actually recover your strength, pass the test of the family's forbidden area, and succeed as the family's patriarch. He even passed the Sky Pillar sex competition and won first place. That's great. I already knew that you wouldn't disappoint me. You would protect the Ji family's 100 years of foundation and rise again, becoming famous throughout the world. Speaking up to this point, Ji Changkong's emotions were somewhat agitated. His heart was filled with deep shock. Ji Tianqing being able to pass the test of the family's forbidden area had already surprised him. When he entered the family's forbidden area, he was at the 6th stage of the Tongxian realm, but he was still beaten black and blue by the black dragon. He only managed to obtain the blue crystal after a close shave with death. Not only did Ji Tianqing pass the test, but he also wiped away his shame in the Sky Pillar Sect's entrance competition and won first place, becoming famous throughout the Imperial Azure dynasty. As a father, how could he not feel proud of his son? In addition, Ji Tianqing was able to control the huge Ji family at the age of 17. He even used thunderous methods to eliminate the Ji family's internal problems. This made Ji Changkong feel even more incredulous. Seeing his father's emotions and amazement, Ji Tianqing smiled and said with concern, "Father, although there are some unavoidable disturbances in the family's property and business after I eliminated the internal problems, I have already made arrangements. The current situation has already stabilized. At most, it will take 2 months for us to recover. Father, you are the pillar of the Ji family. During this time, you should focus on recuperating. You must recover your injuries and strength as soon as possible." Ji Changkong waved his hand and said with a smile, "Tianqing, you don't have to worry about me. I know the extent of my injuries. I know that you are wholeheartedly pursuing the peak of martial arts. Your lifelong goal is to enter the Sky Pillar sect to cultivate. You don't have to worry about the future. You can go to the Sky Pillar sect to cultivate at ease. I will take care of the family's mundane matters. You don't have to worry about these trivial matters." Ji Tianqing was still worried and asked worriedly, "Father, your injuries haven't healed yet. What if the Ling family makes a comeback and retaliates?" Ji Changkong pointed at Mu Shan beside him and said with a smile, "Just now, I had Mu Shan pass down the order to recall 16 Shadow Sword Hall experts to guard the Ji residence. With Mu Shan and the 16 Shadow Sword Hall experts, the Ji residence will be safe. The Ling family won't dare to make a move against me." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and nodded, "That's good. Then I will go back and prepare. We will leave for the Sky Pillar sect in 5 days." With this matter settled, the father and son chatted for a while more before Ji Tianqing took his leave. Half an hour later, Ji Tianqing returned to the cool breeze courtyard. Just as he walked to the door, he heard 2 voices coming from inside the room. They were talking in low voices. "Humph. Old Ji is really not a good friend. He's been busy with the Ji family's matters these past few days and hasn't made anything good for me. I have to steal food personally to eat." The one who spoke was naturally the little ice fox, Qian Yu. Yes. Little fox, you are still the smart one. A few days ago, I helped old Ji fight and used up a lot of energy. My body is in a terrible state. I need to eat more to replenish my body." Ji Tianqing was very familiar with this voice. It was the little black dragon's voice. "Hey! Little black dragon, don't eat so fast. Leave some for me. Damn it. That roasted chicken is mine. Give it back to me." Qian Yu's voice sounded again. It was unclear that she still had food in her mouth. Ji Tianqing frowned and immediately pushed open the door. He saw that the round table in the room was filled with all kinds of delicious food. There were all kinds of fresh fruits and delicious dishes, as well as roasted chicken, roasted duck, and roasted lamb legs. The food was piled up like a small mountain. Qian Yu and the little black dragon's claws were holding on to the food. They were eating heartily, grease dripping from their mouths. When Ji Tianqing walked into the room, Qian Yu was reaching out with its little claws, trying to snatch a golden roasted chicken from the little black dragon's hands. The 2 of them heard the door open and stopped at the same time. They turned their heads to look at the door. Ji Tianqing looked at the 2 of them with a strange expression. He pretended to be angry and said, "Wow, the 2 of you are stealing food behind my back." The little black dragon hurriedly swallowed half of the chicken leg in its mouth. Then, with a whoosh, it turned back into the black dragon's sword and wormed its way into the scabbard hanging on the wall. Qian Yu hurriedly wiped the grease from its little mouth and smiled. Old Ji, don't be angry. I didn't mean to steal food. It rolled its eyes and pointed its little claws at the black dragon's sword hanging on the wall. It said righteously, it was the little black dragon who wanted to eat and instigated me to steal food from the kitchen. It has been complaining to me for the past few days. It said that it used up a lot of energy to help you fight in the arena that day. It even hurt its waist and needed to eat to replenish its energy. The black dragon's sword hanging on the wall swung twice. The little black dragon's sullen voice sounded. It wasn't me. It has nothing to do with me. Little Fox, it was Hungry Fox who complained first. Hungry Fox complained first. Ji Tianqing was amused by the little black dragon's words. This sentence is concise and comprehensive, and it's accurate. Hee hee. Chapter 86. Seeing that Qian Yu still wanted to argue, Ji Tianqing waved his hand. All right, stop arguing. Eat as much as you want. If it's not enough, I'll get the kitchen to send more. I'm preparing to go into seclusion to cultivate for a few days. During this time, you two should behave yourselves. We'll be going to the Sky Pillar sect in a few days. After Qian Yu and the little black dragon finished eating, Ji Tianqing prepared to enter seclusion. But at this moment, Huan Er's voice came from outside the door. Eldest young master, the little princess is here. Quickly come out and take a look. Huan Er's tone was a bit strange, causing Ji Tianqing to frown. He was somewhat puzzled. He hurriedly had Qian Yu return to the 100 treasures brocade pouch before opening the door and walking into the small courtyard. Huan Er was standing at the entrance of the small courtyard, respectfully welcoming the little princess. At the entrance of the courtyard, a delicate and cute figure wearing a light yellow dress entered Ji Tianqing's eyes. Big brother Tianqing, I'm here. Ji Ku entered the courtyard with a smile as beautiful as a flower. Her footsteps were light and nimble, and it was clear that she was in an extremely good mood. Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. He was about to step forward to welcome Ji Ku. However, when he saw a large group of guards following closely behind Ji Ku and carrying several boxes, the smile on his face immediately turned into confusion. Ku, what are you doing now? Ji Ku came to his side with a face full of joy. She intimately held his arm and directed the palace guards to carry the boxes into the room. Big brother Tianqing, don't misunderstand. I'm not here to give you gifts this time. These boxes are all my luggage. I've decided to stay with you for a few days. Ji Tianqing's expression became a bit strange. Ku, this isn't good, is it? You're an unmarried princess, and you're coming to stay with me. If the news gets out, there will definitely be a lot of rumors. Ji Ku's face was full of smiles. Clearly, she didn't care about the negative effects. After the guards put down the boxes, she ordered them to leave the small courtyard. She pulled Ji Tianqing into the room. After sitting down, she smiled and said, Big brother Tianqing, we'll be going to the sky-bearing sect in a few days anyway. I'm bored staying in the palace for the next few days, so I'll stay here for a few days. It'll be convenient for us to set off together. What's wrong? Big brother Tianqing, are you unwilling? Am I too abrupt and presumptuous? If Big brother Tianqing finds me annoying, then I'll just move out. As she spoke, she pouted. Her beautiful face revealed a wronged expression, and a layer of mist appeared in her clear eyes. Ji Tianqing quickly smiled and pinched her cute little face. He comforted her and said, Ku, you misunderstood me. Why would I find you annoying? You're right. You can stay here for the time being. In a few days, we'll head to the sky-bearing sect together. Only then did the wronged expression on Ji Ku's face disappear and she revealed a sweet smile. I knew it. Big brother Tianqing is the best. Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. Then, he had Huan Er tidy up a room for Ji Ku and prepare a place to stay. Only the two of them were left in the room. Ji Ku leaned over to Ji Tianqing's ear and whispered, "Big brother Tianqing, I have something to tell you. This morning, people from the sky-bearing sect brought my imperial uncle out of the imperial city and set off for the sky-bearing sect." Hearing this news, Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. Little Prince Jiling? He actually went with the people from the sky-bearing sect to the sky-bearing sect? Ji Ku nodded. Her clear eyes were also filled with doubt. That's right. I also don't understand why. It's reasonable to say that you, the first place of the tournament, should be valued by the sky-bearing sect. They should be bringing you along. Ji Tianqing remained silent. His eyes were surging with thoughts. He kept feeling that something was wrong. After a moment of silence, Ji Ku suddenly thought of something. Her expression couldn't help but change slightly. She lowered her voice and said, "That's right, big brother Tianqing, I remembered something. Previously, I inadvertently heard that the 3 disciples from the sky-bearing sect came to our Imperial Azure Dynasty not only to supervise the tournament, but also to complete a mission. They seem to be looking for someone and my Imperial uncle is the person they're looking for. Big brother Tianqing, do you think it's because of this?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said with a solemn expression, "It should be. But why is Ji Ling the person they're looking for?" Ji Ku frowned and shook her head. "I also don't understand why. Perhaps when we reach the sky-bearing sect, we'll know what's going on." Following that, Ji Ku chatted with him for a while more before preparing to return to her room to rest. Ji Tianqing hurriedly urged, "Cuckoo, I'm preparing to go into seclusion to cultivate for a few days. We'll set off in 5 days. It'll take at least half a month from the Imperial Azure Dynasty to the sky-bearing sect. The journey is long and bumpy. You should rest well these few days." Ji Ku nodded obediently to show that she understood. She bid farewell to him and returned to her room. Ji Tianqing also entered the secret underground chamber. He took out many pills and swallowed them before he began to cultivate. 2 days ago, he took the time to go to the martial arts hall and tested his strength again. Now, he already had the strength of the 5th level of the true element realm. Moreover, the sword embryo in his body was growing stronger day by day. His strength was still rapidly increasing. Ji Tianqing considered and prepared to cultivate the 3rd level of the sword heart Dao. He wanted to refine the 9 main meridians in his body into a sword vein. Although his meridians had been transformed by the red star flower's medicinal power, his meridians were much tougher and stronger than ordinary people. However, this was far from enough. It was difficult to support the powerful sword qi and the circulation of his true essence. Only by refining the 9 main meridians into a sword vein could he circulate his true essence more smoothly and control the sword qi more freely. In the dark secret chamber, Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged in the essence-gathering array. His hands formed the sword-controlling art as he began to cultivate. The medicinal pills that he had just consumed were also catalyzed by his true essence and emitted a majestic medicinal power. The medicinal power flowed endlessly in his meridians, strengthening his true essence and sword embryo. He circulated his qi and cultivated for 9 cycles, and a day had passed. A day of bitter cultivation had increased his strength by a few notches. The sword embryo had also grown significantly. He was about to consume another medicinal pill to cultivate and his body suddenly stiffened. His consciousness was sucked into the mysterious black hole in his dantian and into Kenshin's tomb. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing's consciousness entered a cold and dark space. He looked around and realized that he was no longer in the vast wilderness. Instead, he was under the indomitable pitch-black sword steel. The ancient sword steel that was tens of thousands of feet tall was as majestic as before. It emitted a majestic aura that could suppress heaven and earth. The 4 blood-red words on the sword steel emitted a domineering and sharp sword essence that seemed to be able to tear the sky apart. Ji Tianqing immediately understood that the sword soul, the burial of heaven, must have pulled his consciousness into Kenshin's tomb and brought him here. Chapter 87. Ji Tianqing looked up at the ancient sword steel and asked calmly. Senior Burial of Heaven, did you summon me here? Burial of Heaven's voice immediately sounded from the ancient sword steel. It was still as powerful and distant as usual. Yes. Ji Tianqing nodded and asked again, Senior Burial of Heaven, may I ask why you summoned me here? Burial of Heaven said in a low voice, Boy, although you can cultivate the path of the sword heart and have reached the beginner level, you are still a human being. Your innate talent is limited, and you are destined to only be able to reach the third level of the path of the sword heart. You will never be able to reach the fourth level. Although your comprehension is passable and your heart is firm enough, you do not have a strong enough constitution and bloodline. You are destined to not achieve much. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing could not help but frown and ask, Senior Burial of Heaven, did you summon me here to persuade me to give up on cultivating the path of the sword heart? Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment before saying, although you are very weak and have a low aptitude, from what I know about you, you are determined and persistent. You will definitely not give up on cultivating the path of the sword heart. Ji Tianqing nodded and said in a firm tone, That's right. Cultivating the path of the sword heart is the only way for me to become stronger. I will never give up. After a pause, he looked at the sword steel with shining eyes and asked, Senior Burial of Heaven, since you have pointed out my flaws, you are willing to tell me these secrets. You must have a way to solve my innate talent, right? Burial of Heaven said in a low voice, Yes, you are very smart. Since you have successfully cultivated the path of the sword heart with a human body, you can be considered to have some connection with Kenshin. I can help you solve your innate talent flaw. Kenshin once stepped into the Tiantian domain and left an opportunity in the Star Ancient Realm. That's a drop of Kenshin's divine blood sealed within the heavenly astral bead. If you can find the heavenly star bead and obtain that drop of divine blood, you'll be able to fuse with the Kenshin bloodline and solve the flaw of your innate talent. You'll also be able to successfully cultivate the supreme sword Tao of Kenshin. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing's eyes shone brightly, his heart filled with anticipation and desire. Ancient Star Realm? Divine Blood? Heavenly Star Bead? Thank you, Senior Burial of Heaven. I'll remember this. He knew very well that the supreme sword Tao that the sword soul Burial of Heaven mentioned was not only the sword heart Tao, but also a higher level sword Tao absolute art. If he could obtain the god's blood in the heavenly star bead, not only would he be able to make up for his innate flaws, but he would also be able to cultivate a more profound sword Tao. How could he not be excited? How could his blood not boil? However, Ji Tianqing quickly calmed down as his heart was filled with worry. The ancient star realm is the most mysterious and peculiar ancient realm in the Tiantian region. Legend has it that it's a cultivation holy land created by an ancient almighty. It's like a small world. The Sky Pillar sect and the 7 top sects of the Tiantian region are all located in the ancient star realm, and they each occupy a spirit vein treasure land. With my current strength, searching for the heavenly star bead in the ancient star realm is undoubtedly like searching for a needle in a haystack. I'm afraid I won't be able to find it in my lifetime, right? The Sword Soul Burial of Heaven told me this news. Although it's exciting, it's just an illusion. It can only be a fantasy. At this moment, the Sword Soul Burial of Heaven spoke again. Kid, aren't you going to the Sky Pillar sect in a few days? The Sky Pillar sect is in the ancient star realm. After you settle down in the Sky Pillar sect, do your best to find the heavenly star bead. If you want to master Kenshin's supreme sword Tao and become a supreme expert like Kenshin, you only have one path to take. Ji Tianqing frowned and asked doubtfully, Senior Burial of Heaven, how do you know that I'm going to the Sky Pillar sect in a few days? The Sword Soul Burial of Heaven let out a low chuckle. Hee, I'm in your body. I know everything about you. Otherwise, how could you have survived in the Taiyi mountain range and even subdued that little heavenly fox? Ji Tianqing came to a realization and felt even more respect for the Sword Soul Burial of Heaven. Oh right, Senior Burial of Heaven, you said that Qian Yu is a little heavenly fox? Can you tell me more about it? The Sword Soul Burial of Heaven said indifferently, it's just a divine beast, heavenly fox. although it's one of a kind in this world, when I was in the upper realm. At this point, it suddenly stopped and didn't continue. In short, it's also a great opportunity for you to subdue that little heavenly fox. It will be a great help to you in the future. Since the Sword Soul Burial of Heaven didn't want to say more, Ji Tianqing didn't ask any more and nodded to show that he understood. Thank you for your advice, Senior Burial of Heaven. Senior Burial of Heaven, you told me so many secrets today and even helped me think of a way to solve my innate talent defect. You must have your reasons. Ji Tianqing knew very well that there was no such thing as love or hatred for no reason in this world. The Sword Soul Burial of Heaven didn't have any friendship with him, but it was willing to tell him so many secrets and help him come up with ideas. It must have other motives. Sure enough, the Sword Soul Burial of Heaven didn't hide it and said truthfully, yes, part of the reason why I helped you is because you have some relationship with Kenshin. And the main reason is that I need you to grow stronger quickly and help me obtain a stronger primordial chi so that I can gradually awaken. The primordial chi I obtained from the little heavenly fox was too weak. It could only keep my soul from being destroyed, but it couldn't really awaken. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and smiled. Senior Burial of Heaven, since that's the case, then this is a deal between us. You guide me in cultivating Kenshin's supreme sword Dao, and I help you recover your primordial chi after I become stronger. How about it? The Sword Soul Burial of Heaven suddenly chuckled in a mocking tone. The sword steel also burst forth with a soaring sword intent, causing a fierce wind to blow in the sky. Ha ha ha, a lowly human boy dares to make a deal with me? You're really an interesting little guy. Fine, I'll do as you say. This matter was settled. The ancient sword steel burst forth with an invisible force and sent Ji Tianqing's consciousness out of Kenshin's tomb. Swoosh! His consciousness returned to his body, and he opened his eyes. Star Ancient Realm, Heavenly Star Pearl, Kenshin's blood. I will never give up on the Sword Heart Dao. I will definitely find the Heavenly Star Pearl and obtain Kenshin's blood. Ji Tianqing clenched his fists and swore in his heart. After a long time, he finally calmed down and began to cultivate again. In the next 4 days, he cultivated in seclusion in the secret chamber and didn't show himself. It wasn't until the morning of the 5th day that he ended his cultivation and walked out of the secret underground chamber. At this time, his strength had increased a few times compared to before he went into seclusion, and he wasn't far from true energy stage 6. Today was the day he and the little princess Ji Ku set off. Please add me to the bookshelf. Please recommend me and give me tips. Thank you, brothers. Chapter 88. Early in the morning, the Ji residents prepared a carriage for Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku. Other than the 2 coachmen, there were also 4 bodyguards who would escort them to the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Changkong personally led the Ji family to send Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku out of the Ji residence and waved goodbye to them. The 2 carriages left the imperial city under the morning sun and headed north along the official road, kicking up a cloud of dust. Originally, Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku were in a separate carriage and their luggage was also in their respective carriages. The Ji family arranged it this way to avoid suspicion, and they also didn't dare to neglect the little princess. They couldn't let the precious little princess squeeze in the same carriage as Ji Tianqing, right? What kind of scandal was this? Where would the imperial family's face be? However, when the carriage left the imperial city, the little princess squeezed into Ji Tianqing's carriage and insisted on squeezing in with him. Her reason was very good. The journey to the Sky Pillar sect was so long and it was too boring to sit alone in a carriage. Of course, she needed someone to chat with to relieve her boredom. Ji Tianqing naturally couldn't bear to refuse her. Seeing her smiling face and her extremely good mood, he chatted with her along the way. In the afternoon, Ji Ku was a little tired and didn't chat anymore. She lay in Ji Tianqing's arms and dozed off. Ji Tianqing naturally wouldn't wake her up. He even changed into a more comfortable position and hugged her as he quietly pondered. When night fell, the 2 carriages drove into a small town. Everyone found an inn to stay in and rest. Early the next morning, everyone rested well and replenished their water and food before continuing on their journey. From the Imperial Azure Kingdom to the Star Ancient Realm where the Sky Pillar sect was located, they had to pass through 2 kingdoms. Fortunately, they were on the main roads of the various kingdoms and the carriage's speed was also very fast. They could travel 500 to 600 miles a day. 3 days later, the carriage drove out of the Imperial Azure Kingdom and entered the Mao Rong Kingdom. There were many mountains and rivers in the Mao Rong Kingdom. The scenery was magnificent and the culture was also very different from the Imperial Azure Kingdom. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku sat in the carriage and enjoyed the scenery along the way. They chatted happily. This was especially true for Ji Ku, who had grown up in the Imperial Palace and rarely left the Imperial City. She had always been curious and yearned for the outside world. Leaving the Imperial Azure Kingdom for the Sky Pillar sect was the furthest journey she had ever taken in her life. With the person she loved by her side, she could broaden her horizons and increase her experience. Of course, she was excited and happy. After 3 days of interaction, her relationship with Ji Tianqing had become more and more intimate. Although Ji Tianqing took care of her as an elder brother, she had already regarded Ji Tianqing as her lover, so she did not avoid suspicion in the slightest. Now, Ji Ku had already fallen in love with this kind of life where he didn't have to care about other people's opinions and worldly etiquette when he was outside. She secretly prayed in her heart that it would be great if she could stay like this with Big Brother Tianqing forever. 9 days later, the carriage left Mao Rong State and entered the territory of Hengchuan State. As long as they crossed Hengchuan State, they would reach the ancient Star Realm. That evening, Ji Tianqing and the others entered a city called Fengyang City. The area of Fengyang City wasn't big, only about half the size of the Imperial City. However, the city was bustling with people coming and going. Even at night, it was still noisy. After all, Fengyang City was the only way to enter Hengchuan State. Many merchants from the Imperial Azure Kingdom and Mao Rong State had to pass by here to enter and exit Hengchuan State. After Ji Tianqing and the others entered Fengyang City, they stayed in the best inn in the city and rested there for the night. The inn was very big and there were many guests eating in the main hall on the first floor. There were all kinds of people and there were people from all walks of life. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku led 2 guards into the main hall and sat down at a table to eat. Many of the young and middle-aged men in the surroundings widened their eyes when they saw the appearance of the little princess Ji Ku. They were stunned. After all, Ji Ku was the princess of the imperial family. Not only was she born beautiful and cute, but she also had a noble and graceful temperament. Even though she was only 15 years old, she was already a rare beauty. If she were to grow up a few years, she would definitely be an outstanding beauty. The surrounding men only dared to sneak a few glances at Ji Ku but did not dare to have any improper thoughts. When they saw Ji Ku and Ji Tianqing's manners and the guards beside them, they knew that these 2 were of noble status and should not be provoked. Ji Ku ignored the crowd's reaction and only had Ji Tianqing in her eyes. Following the principle of not talking while eating, she lowered her head and ate calmly. Only when she met Ji Tianqing's eyes did she reveal a cute smile. However, when the 2 of them were only halfway through their meal, a middle-aged martial artist dressed in a blue robe and carrying a sword on his back came to the table. This person was dressed as a guard, but his words and actions revealed a bit of arrogance. He ignored Ji Tianqing and cupped his hands to Ji Ku. He said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Miss, my young master would like to invite Miss upstairs for a chat. Would Miss be willing to give him the honor?" After saying that, he raised his head and glanced at the heavenly private room on the 2nd floor. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku immediately frowned. They put down their bowls and chopsticks at the same time and raised their heads to look at the private room. In the exquisitely decorated private room, a handsome young man in a white robe was standing by the window and looking down at Ji Ku. The handsome young man was about 20 years old. He wore a jade crown on his head and his hair was tied up in a bun. His face was fair and handsome, and his whole body exuded a confident and noble aura. When he saw Ji Ku looking up, he even nodded slightly at Ji Ku and revealed a gentle and elegant smile. If it were any other ordinary girl, they would not be able to resist his gentle gaze and smile. Moreover, he was obviously a young man of noble status and strength. Which girl would reject his kind invitation? Unfortunately, Ji Ku was not an ordinary girl. That handsome young man was destined to be disappointed. She retracted her gaze and glanced at the middle-aged guard. Her tone was indifferent as she said, "Please tell your young master that I'm not interested and don't know him. I don't want to give him the honor." The middle-aged guard's expression changed instantly. His eyes were sharp as he shouted in a low voice, "Miss, do you know who my young master is? How dare you be so merciless?" Ji Ku glanced at him disdainfully and sneered disdainfully, "Why should I care who your young master is? What does it have to do with me? Also, do you know who I am? How dare you be so rude to me?" At this moment, Ji Tianqing ordered the guard beside him expressionlessly, "Long Wu, if this person dares to speak another word, throw him out." The guard named Long Wu was actually one of the Shadow Sword Hall's experts. He was a cold-blooded swordsman at the second stage of the mystic comprehending realm. Hearing Ji Tianqing's order, Long Wu stared coldly at the middle-aged guard. His entire body was emitting a chilling murderous aura. The middle-aged guard was so angry that his face turned ashen. However, he did not dare to fight with Long Wu in public to avoid being punished by his master. He raised his head and glanced at the handsome young man on the second floor before resentfully turning around and leaving. Chapter 89. In a private room on the second floor. The middle-aged guard stood respectfully at the door and reported Ji Ku's words to the white-robed young man. After he finished speaking, he added a few more words with anger still lingering in his voice. "Your Highness, you are the first prince of our Changfeng nation. How honorable is your identity? It is her honor that you are willing to invite her. I didn't expect that girl to be so rude." The white-robed young man sat at the table with a wine cup in one hand and his chin in the other. There was a sneer at the corner of his mouth. He pondered for a moment and muttered to himself, "Such a beautiful, cute, and intelligent girl. It's really rare to see such a person. I have traveled all over Changfeng, Maorong, and other countries, but I have never seen such a lovable girl. Her beauty and intelligence can almost be compared to Xian. However, she has a soft spot for that ordinary black-robed young man. What a pity." The middle-aged guard frowned and thought for a moment. A cold light flashed in his eyes as he lowered his voice and said, "Your Highness, do you want me to teach that kid a lesson? Your subordinate will capture that girl later. Tonight, Your Highness can do whatever you want with her." He had done this kind of thing for the first prince before, and it was more than once. If he really wanted to do this kind of thing, he was very familiar with it. It was also because of this that he was highly regarded by the first prince and was brought along by his side. The first prince frowned slightly and pondered for a moment before waving his hand and saying, "No need. Let's put this matter aside for now. Go check how many silver notes we have with us. Prepare all the money. I will go to the Treasure Heaven Pavilion later. There will be a 10,000 spirit jade pillow in tonight's auction. It is said that this item has miraculous effects. It can regulate yin and yang qi and treat all kinds of illnesses. Xian has been tortured by extreme cold poison since she was young. If I get the 10,000 spirit jade pillow and give it to her, I think she will." The middle-aged guard cupped his hands and accepted the order. He quickly went to count the money in the luggage. In the hall on the first floor, Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku continued to eat. Ji Ku's mood was not affected even though he had been disturbed by a strange noble young master. The two of them were eating when they heard the guests at the nearby tables chatting idly, and their words were mixed with words like auction and Treasure Heaven Pavilion. Ji Ku listened attentively for a while and got the gist of it. She revealed an expression that was filled with interest as she said to Ji Tianqing, "Big brother Tianqing, I heard that the Treasure Heaven Pavilion in the city is going to hold an auction tonight. This is an annual grand event. The reason why the city is so lively tonight is most likely because of this auction. Shall we go and take a look? Ji Tianqing frowned slightly and shook his head with a chuckle. Let's not join in the fun. When we were in the imperial city, we've seen countless auctions. This Fengyang city is far less prosperous than the imperial city. It's just an auction. There's no point in watching it. Even though Ji Ku yearned for it in her heart, seeing that Ji Tianqing didn't agree, she could only purse her small lips and resentfully say, "All right, I'll listen to Big Brother Tianqing." While the two of them were talking, a handsome youth at the neighboring table had been listening to their conversation with a smile on his face. This blue-robed youth was about the same age as Ji Tianqing. He had a tall and straight figure, a handsome face, and an imposing appearance. There were also two middle-aged martial artists standing at the side of the table. They were obviously his attendants and guards. After hearing Ji Tianqing's words, the blue-robed youth smiled slightly and said to Ji Tianqing, "This brother's words are incorrect. Brother, you might not know, but this Fengyang city is a place one must pass through to enter the Hengchuan kingdom from the three neighboring kingdoms. It's also an important place for merchants to trade. The Treasure Heaven Pavilion is a large merchant company that has businesses all over the three neighboring kingdoms. The auction that they hold every year is a top grand event for the three neighboring kingdoms. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many merchants and martial artists gathered in Fengyang City tonight." Ji Tianqing's brows raised as his eyes stared fixedly at the blue-robed youth, and he silently listened to the blue-robed youth without interrupting him. Ji Ku's beautiful eyes once again surged with yearning, and she was obviously slightly moved. When he saw this scene, the blue-robed youth stood up and walked over to Ji Tianqing's table to sit down. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Brother, various priceless treasures have appeared in the past auctions, and most of them are treasures of heaven and earth that martial artists yearn for even in their dreams. Supposedly, the Treasure Heaven Pavilion will take out a rare and precious treasure to auction in tonight's auction, and it's a myriad spirit jade pillow. People who suffer from diseases or yin and yang disorder can be cured by this treasure. Women can sleep on this jade pillow and maintain eternal youth and beauty. It's even to the extent that martial artists can obtain twice the results with half the effort when cultivating and swiftly increase their strength. All in all, this treasure has extraordinary origins and miraculous effects." When he heard the words eternal youth and beauty, Ji Ku's eyes were instantly suffused with a crystalline light, and he impatiently wanted to go experience it. Ji Tianqing's expression was still calm, and his gaze carried a sense of scrutiny as he sized up the blue-robed youth. A complete stranger had actually taken the initiative to introduce the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's auction to him, and even described it in an extremely tempting manner. He couldn't help but be vigilant and suspicious. Could it be that this unfamiliar blue-robed youth is a shill of the Treasure Heaven Pavilion? The blue-robed youth obviously noticed Ji Tianqing's suspicion as well, and he wasn't embarrassed in the slightest, and he still had a hearty smile on his face. He cupped his hands to Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku. Then he introduced himself. "Brother, young miss, I'm Nie Hao, the grandson of Marshal Qinkuan of Mao Rong Kingdom." When he mentioned his grandfather, Marshal Qinkuan, his face naturally revealed a proud expression. Ji Tianqing immediately understood and returned a kind smile to Nie Hao. He cupped his hands in return and said, "So it's the grandson of Marshal Qinkuan. Sorry for not recognizing you." Marshal Qinkuan's name was Nie Qinkuan, the Grand Marshal of Mao Rong Kingdom's troops and horses, and also the country's #1 general. Mao Rong Kingdom's imperial family was weak, and the emperor was muddle-headed and incompetent, but Marshal Qinkuan was the mainstay of Mao Rong Kingdom and was deeply respected by the people. Marshal Qinkuan had fought all his life, and his military achievements were splendid, and he rarely lost. It was his iron-blooded army that protected Mao Rong Kingdom's safety for 100 years, causing the surrounding countries to be fearful. Although Qingyun Kingdom and Mao Rong Kingdom had many frictions, the people of Qingyun Kingdom still respected Marshal Qinkuan. Ji Tianqing saw that Nie Hao's bearing was extraordinary, and his speech and actions were open and candid, quite having the demeanor of a descendant of a general, so the suspicion in his heart was naturally dispelled. He exchanged a few words with Nie Hao and exchanged names, then he made an inviting gesture, asking Nia Hao to sit down and talk. After Nia Hao sat down, he opened his mouth and asked, "Brother Nia, may I ask, how do you know so much about the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's auction?" Nia Hao did not hide it, and laughed at himself, and said in a somewhat low tone, "To be honest, I passed by Fengyang City this time and deliberately stayed for 2 days, just waiting for this auction. My father has been on the battlefield all year round to protect the territory, and he has suffered an injury that is difficult to heal for a lifetime, and he will not live for long. I heard the news that the Treasure Heaven Pavilion is going to auction the 10,000 spirit jade pillow, which can relieve my father's injury and allow him to live for a few more years, so I specially came to buy that 10,000 spirit jade pillow." Chapter 90. Nia Hao's feelings and experiences caused Ji Tianqing to empathize with him. His father, Ji Changkong, was also plagued by internal injuries and probably wouldn't live for long, so he was extremely worried about his father's injuries as well. Imperceptibly, the distance between him and Nia Hao was pulled closer. The two of them chatted for a while, and it was already 3:45 p.m. After a while, the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's auction would begin. Nia Hao stood up and bid his farewells, intending to leave the inn and rush to the Treasure Heaven Pavilion, and he invited Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku to go with him. Ji Ku really wanted to experience this grand event, and Ji Tianqing didn't want to dampen her spirits, so he nodded in agreement. The three of them left the inn and rode a carriage to rush to the Treasure Heaven Pavilion in the city. The Treasure Heaven Pavilion was located on the most bustling street in the city, and it occupied an extremely vast area. The few palaces and tall buildings were constructed with a grand and magnificent aura. When the three of them arrived at the Treasure Heaven Pavilion, the outside of the pavilion was already packed with people, and it was bustling and clamorous. Merchants and martial artists from the surrounding countries, and numerous influential officials with extraordinary statuses entered the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's entrance in an endless stream. Ji Tianqing's group of 3 followed the crowd into the Treasure Heaven Pavilion, and they entered the auction venue after a short moment. The venue was an extremely spacious hall, and there was a circular high platform at the center area. It was the auction platform, and there were a few thousand seats in the surroundings. Besides this, there were over 100 exquisite private rooms on the second floor of the hall, and those were rooms that only wealthy and influential officials had the qualifications to sit in. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku only came to join in the fun and broaden their horizons, so they casually found 2 seats in the hall and sat down. Nia Hao traveled with the two of them, so he naturally sat close to the two of them, and he sat beside Ji Tianqing. Nia Hao smiled lightly and reminded Ji Tianqing before the auction began. "Brother Ji, many rare treasures will surely appear in the auction later. If you see a treasure that interests you, there's no harm in bidding for it. The rules of the Treasure Heaven Pavilion are that only gold and silver can be used. The silver notes of the surrounding countries can be used, but it can't be used as collateral." It was obviously not the first time Nia Hao had come to the Treasure Heaven Pavilion, and he was extremely familiar with the various matters of the auction. After hearing his explanation, Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku had an idea in their hearts. It didn't take long for the 2,000 seats in the hall to be filled. The time of the auction had arrived, and the auction had officially begun. An enchanting woman in a red dress walked up to the auction stage in the middle of the hall. This woman was about 30 years old. She was at her most mature, seductive, and feminine age. Her face was beautiful, and her figure was very hot. Her low-collared fiery red dress revealed a towering snow-white breast, which was very eye-catching. Ji Tianqing only took 2 glances at her before he felt a pinch on his waist. His expression changed slightly as he turned to look at Ji Ku beside him. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Ku, you, Big brother Tianqing, you're not allowed to look." Ji Ku pouted angrily, looking adorable. Ji Tianqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and he hurriedly explained. Cough. Ku, don't think too much. I just feel that the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's business methods aren't bad. Sending out such an enchanting woman to be an auctioneer will surely make a killing tonight. Niahao smiled lightly and nodded. Brother Ji is right. This woman is called Wild Rose, and she's one of the most renowned auctioneers in the Treasure Heaven Pavilion. Not only is she charming and enchanting, she's extremely skilled in stirring up the hearts of others. She frequently makes those influential and wealthy merchants that harbor ill intentions throw away money recklessly and compete for wealth here. Ji Tianqing nodded to indicate his understanding, and he didn't say anything further. Meanwhile, Wild Rose smiled charmingly and bowed to the guests, and then she used her clear and melodious voice to welcome the arrival of everyone and introduce the auction tonight. Not only was her voice pleasant and enchanting, but she was also full of witty words. A few sentences caused the atmosphere in the hall to become lively, and it caused the blood of countless people to boil and be filled with anticipation. In next to no time, the auction officially began. The first treasure was sent up to the auction stage by 2 guards, and Wild Rose opened the sandalwood box and withdrew a treasured sword with a brown sheath from the box. She had a light smile as she introduced. The first treasure of tonight's auction is a top-grade profound artifact treasured sword called Windshadow Sword. This treasured sword was personally forged by the Windhaven Kingdom's weapons forging grandmaster, OU, and it fused with a piece of wind lightning true gold, causing this sword to possess wind attribute spirit energy and possess extraordinary might. Starting the auction for the Windshadow Sword now. The starting price is 5 million, and every increment must not be less than 100,000. Sword Dao experts, a treasured sword befits a hero. What are all of you still waiting for? Wild Rose clearly explained the origins and effects of the Windshadow Sword in a few sentences, and she did her best to incite the emotions of everyone, praising this sword to the skies. Ji Tianqing was born into a family of weapons forgers, and he had his own knowledge and views towards this treasured sword. Every martial artist had their own innate attribute, and absorbing the spirit energy of heaven and earth to transform into true essence was also a corresponding attribute. However, the majority of martial artists' attributes were one of the 5 elements. For example, Ji Tianqing's innate attribute was metal, and his metal attribute's spirit energy was sharp and fierce. Therefore, his talent in Sword Dao was extremely high. Other than the 5 elements, there were also wind, thunder, rain, fog, and other special forces in heaven and earth. These were almost impossible for human martial artists to possess. Therefore, weapons and equipment that contained these special forces were usually priceless and extremely expensive. Although this Windshadow Sword is not bad, I already have the Black Dragon Sword. No profound artifact or treasured sword can compare to the Black Dragon Sword, Ji Tianqing murmured in his heart, but he did not have any thoughts of bidding. Ji Ku and Nia Hao were also not interested in this treasured sword. Many martial artists and dignitaries in the hall were extremely interested in the Windshadow Sword, and they all began to bid. In just a few short minutes, the Windshadow Sword was won by a Sword Dao expert for a sky-high price of more than 7 million taels of silver. Following this, Wild Rose took out the second treasure and began the auction. This time, 3 supreme-grade black-level elixirs were auctioned. They were also made by a master alchemist and had the effect of increasing one's skills and cultivation. Everyone bid one after another. In the end, these 3 elixirs were won by a dignitary for a high price of 3 million taels of silver. The auction continued. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th treasures appeared one after another. Most of these treasures were elixirs, weapons and equipment, formations, and so on. Occasionally, there were some unique treasures that were also related to martial artists' cultivation. Every treasure would be auctioned off by everyone, and in the end, it was won at an extremely high price. Ji Tianqing and the other 2 watched silently and did not bid. It was not until the 7th treasure appeared on the stage that Ji Tianqing's interest was piqued. He carefully observed the treasure. It was an ice dragon armor, which was also a supreme-grade profound artifact. It was said that it was forged from the scales of an ice dragon and the silk of a heavenly silkworm. This armor looked like a translucent thin shirt. It would be very light when worn, as if it was weightless. However, it was impervious to fire and water, and would not decay for thousands of years. Weapons below supreme-grade profound artifacts would not be able to break through the defense of this armor. Without a doubt, this ice dragon armor was a treasure that martial artists yearned for. Wearing it could save one's life at a critical moment. Chapter 91. Ever since the Sky Pillar sex entrance competition, Ji Tianqing had been eager to obtain a powerful armor. At that time, the young prince, Ji Ling, had worn the golden silk armor and was in an invincible position, making his sword-like neck completely harmless. If he hadn't used the black dragon sword, he really would have been helpless against Ji Ling. Therefore, after Ji Tianqing understood the effects of the ice dragon armor, he didn't hesitate to bid for it. The starting price of this armor was 4,600,000 taels of silver. There were more than 20 people bidding with Ji Tianqing. They were either martial arts experts or wealthy merchants. After a quarter of an hour of bidding, the price of the ice dragon armor was raised to 8 million taels of silver. At this time, there were still 3 people who continued to bid. It was obvious that they were determined to obtain the ice dragon armor. Ji Tianqing didn't hesitate to shout out a sky-high price of 10 million taels of silver without any change in expression, causing a commotion in the hall. Although everyone present was either rich or noble, 10 million taels of silver was still a huge sum. Ordinary wealthy merchants might not be able to take out such a sum. The 3 people hesitated for a while, but in the end, they had no choice but to give up bidding. Ji Tianqing successfully obtained the ice dragon armor, but his expression was still calm, without the slightest bit of excitement or arrogance. Niahao silently looked at Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku, already having a plan in mind. Previously, in the inn, he and Ji Tianqing had exchanged names and could be considered acquaintances. However, Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku had only said their names and didn't reveal their identities. Now, Niahao saw that Ji Tianqing didn't even blink when he threw out 10 million taels of silver. Ji Ku was also indifferent to the sky-high price and didn't care at all. Of course, he could see that Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku's identities were extraordinary and not inferior to his. The auction continued. One after another, rare treasures were sent to the auction stage and then bought at high prices. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed and the auction was about to come to an end. Wild Rose announced with a smile, "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be auctioning off the last treasure of the night. This treasure is called the Myriad Spirit Jade Pillow. It is the finale of this auction. This 10,000 spirit jade pillow has a very miraculous effect." As she introduced the origin and effects of the Myriad Spirit Jade Pillow, she took out a pillow-shaped, light green spiritual jade from the sandalwood box. The jade pillow emitted a sparkling and translucent light under the light. It was covered with a layer of dense green light, appearing extremely mysterious and illusory. Not only that, but the jade pillow also emitted a refreshing fragrance, and there was also a rich fluctuation of yuan qi. When everyone in the hall smelled the fragrance and was enveloped by the yuan qi fluctuation, their spirits were shaken and they felt refreshed. Everyone was far away from the jade pillow, but they could already feel the special effects of the jade pillow. If he could obtain this item, wouldn't he be able to use it to sleep every night? Wouldn't it be even more effective and beneficial to his body? Suddenly, the people in the hall were in an uproar, whispering to each other. Many people's eyes lit up as they rubbed their palms, eager to participate in the auction. However, when Wild Rose announced the starting price of this treasure, most of the people gave up and revealed resentful expressions. The Myriad Spirit Jade Pillow's starting price is 20 million. Each increment must be no less than 1 million. For a moment, everyone in the hall fell silent. Previously, when Ji Tianqing bid for the ice chi armor at a sky-high price of 10 million, it had already made everyone speechless. The starting price of this Myriad Spirit Jade Pillow was 20 million. It was definitely not something the people in the hall could afford. Many people thought to themselves that the only people who could afford this treasure were probably the big shots in the private rooms on the second floor. Ji Tianqing knew that Niahao had come to the auction this time for this Myriad Spirit Jade Pillow. When he heard the sky-high price of 20 million, he subconsciously glanced at Niahao. Niahao's face was calm, and there was no change in his expression. It was obvious that he was prepared. 21 million. His voice was calm as he bid. Everyone in the hall was a little surprised. They all turned to look at Nia Hao with puzzled and scrutinizing eyes. Perhaps they could not understand why Nia Hao was still sitting in the hall on the first floor when he had the money to bid for the myriad spirit jade pillow. At this moment, a few voices rose one after another from the private rooms on the second floor. 22 million, 24 million. 28 million. I bid 30 million. In a short while, the price of the myriad spirit jade pillow was raised to 30 million. Everyone in the hall had a drastic change in expression. They revealed complicated expressions and exclaimed in surprise and low voices. Nia Hao was still calm as he continued to bid. The bigwigs in the private rooms on the second floor also joined in the bidding. Another 15 minutes passed, and the price of the myriad spirit jade pillow was raised to a sky-high price of 50 million. At this point, there were fewer bidding voices. There were only two people left. One of them was Nia Hao, and the other young man's voice came from one of the private rooms on the second floor, 55 million. Hearing the young man's voice, Nia Hao frowned, and his face was solemn. He secretly clenched his fists and said in a low voice, 56 million. Ji Tianqing silently watched Nia Hao. He could see that it was difficult for him to make a bid. The price was probably about to reach his bottom line. The voice from the private room on the second floor was silent for a moment, and then it shouted again, 60 million. This item belongs to none other than me. There was no doubt that the mysterious young man on the second floor was also going all out. His voice was extremely imposing, and he wanted to defeat Nia Hao in one fell swoop. As expected, Nia Hao's body trembled. His face was extremely solemn. He pursed his lips and remained silent for a long time. In one of the private rooms on the second floor, a handsome young man in a white robe sat by the table. He supported his chin with one hand and played with an exquisite wine cup with the other. He was the one who had bid 60 million. The middle-aged guard standing beside him reminded him in a low voice with a solemn expression, "Your Highness, we only have this much money with us." He looked like he wanted to say something but stopped. He clearly wanted to remind the first prince not to casually raise the price. The first prince took a sip of wine, and a confident smile appeared on his face. Of course this prince understands. If the person downstairs raises the price again, this prince can only give up. But this prince's momentum is like a rainbow. The person downstairs is clearly unable to do anything. Does he still dare to raise the price? There is nothing this prince wants that he cannot obtain. The middle-aged guard nodded repeatedly, and his face was full of flattery. At the same time, Nia Hao was still silent. His expression was somewhat ugly, and his eyes were filled with unwillingness. But Wild Rose had already shouted, "The young master upstairs has bid 60 million. Is there anyone higher? If no one else bids, this 10,000 spirit jade pillow will belong to that young master." Ji Tianqing frowned slightly and asked Nia Hao in a low voice, "Brother Nia, this item is very important to you. Why are you not raising the price?" Nia Hao smiled bitterly and said helplessly, "I used all my strength and only prepared 58 million. I thought that would be enough, but I didn't expect." Ji Tianqing had already guessed that Nia Hao was not raising the price because he did not have enough money. After hearing Nia Hao's words, he smiled slightly and took out a stack of banknotes from his sleeve. He handed it to Nia Hao. "Here is 10 million. Take it for emergency use." Nia Hao's body trembled. He looked at Ji Tianqing in astonishment, and for a moment, he did not know what to say. He never thought that this young Master Ji, who he had only known for 4 hours, would be so generous to help him. This was definitely timely help. Nia Hao pursed his lips, and his eyes were filled with sincere gratitude. "Brother Ji, Nia Hao, will remember this kindness in my heart. I will never forget it." Chapter 92. Nia Hao asked himself honestly, If he was asked to take out 10 million taels to help a stranger he met by chance, he might not be able to do it. It was precisely because of this that Ji Tianqing's generous help caused him to be filled with gratitude. This was the way of the world. There were many who would add flowers to brocade, but there were extremely few who would provide timely assistance. When Ji Tianqing heard his sonorous, sincere, and heavy tone, he smiled and waved his hand. "It's nothing. You'd better hurry up and bid. Don't wait for Wild Rose to drop the hammer." Nie Hao nodded heavily. After accepting the stack of banknotes, he opened his mouth and shouted with an imposing manner, 61 million taels. Wild Rose, who was on the auction stage, was about to drop the hammer and announce that the myriad spirit jade pillow was won by the young master upstairs. When she suddenly heard Nie Hao's voice, her hand froze for a moment, then she revealed an even brighter smile. "This young master has bid 61 million taels. Is there a higher bid?" Everyone in the hall immediately discussed spiritedly. They all raised their heads and looked at the private room on the second floor, revealing looks of anticipation. In the private room, the first prince was holding a wine cup and tasting wine with a smile on his face. He was extremely confident and originally thought that he had successfully shocked his opponent. As long as Wild Rose dropped the hammer and announced the result, the myriad spirit jade pillow would be his. But he never expected that at the last moment, the person downstairs actually followed and bid. The first prince's body immediately stiffened. His face became ashen, and his eyes surged with rage. 60 million taels was his limit. This time, he could not bid any more. No matter how much rage and unwillingness he had in his heart, he could only suppress the rage in the bottom of his heart. He tightly pursed his lips and did not say a word. A moment later, Wild Rose announced the result loudly. The finale treasure of this auction, the myriad spirit jade pillow, was sold at a price of 61 million taels and belonged to Nie Hao. The first prince walked to the window with an ashen face and looked down at Nie Hao from above. A cold light flashed in his eyes. The middle-aged guard said in a low voice, "Your First Highness, do you want this subordinate to make a move and snatch that jade pillow?" The first prince's face was dark and he did not speak. He turned around and walked out of the private room with an icy aura. The Treasure Heaven Pavilion's auction ended. Everyone left the auction house one after another and walked out of the Treasure Heaven Pavilion along with the surging crowd, discussing as they walked. After an entire 7 minutes, all the guests left, and the Treasure Heaven Pavilion finally quieted down. After the auction ended, Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and Ji Ku were invited into the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's parlor. Both parties exchanged the money and the goods, completing the auction transaction. Ji Tianqing obtained the Ice Chi armor, and Nie Hao also obtained the myriad spirit jade pillow as he wished. The three of them put away the treasures properly before walking out of the Treasure Heaven Pavilion together. It was already the middle of the night. There were few pedestrians on the street and the lights were dim. Just as the three of them were about to board the carriage, two people walked out from the darkness and blocked Nie Hao's path. The two of them were precisely the first prince and the middle-aged guard, and they had long since been waiting for Nie Hao outside the Treasure Heaven Pavilion's entrance. The eldest prince ignored Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku and walked straight to Nie Hao. He did not beat around the bush either and went straight to the point. "This brother, I'm willing to buy your myriad spirit jade pillow at double the price. What do you think?" Nie Hao recognized his voice and said with a frown, "This young master must be joking. If you can offer double the price, why didn't you bid at the auction just now?" The eldest prince's expression was somewhat grim as he explained in a cold tone, "I can give you 60 million taels first. I'll send people to gather the remaining 60 million and will definitely hand it over to you within 3 days." His tone and attitude were somewhat unyielding. His body faintly emitted a domineering aura that was extremely oppressive. But Nie Hao was unmoved in the slightest and said in a firm tone, "The myriad spirit jade pillow is extremely important to me. No matter how much money you offer, I won't sell it." The eldest prince's expression immediately turned cold. His eyes surged with a sharp glint as he said with a cold smile, "The things that I, Lu Mingyang, want, there is still nothing that I can't get. Since your esteemed self doesn't know what's good for you, then don't blame me for not being courteous." As he finished speaking, the middle-aged guard behind him strode forward and rushed towards Nie Hao as fast as a gust of wind. He slammed his palm towards Nie Hao's chest. This middle-aged guard was a Tongxian realm expert. His palm flickered with a scarlet flame that contained an extremely violent power. Before the flaming palm could hit Nie Hao, the scorching heat caused Nie Hao to suffocate. His robes and hair were almost charred. With his true energy realm strength, it was impossible for him to dodge this palm. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing, who was standing at the side, suddenly drew his black dragon sword and slashed at the middle-aged guard's palm with all his might. Swoosh! The dazzling sword light illuminated the night sky. The cold sword chi dispersed the scorching flames. The middle-aged guard's expression changed abruptly. Sensing the terrifying power of the sword light, he immediately retracted his palm. The cold sword light missed and slashed fiercely onto the limestone street, creating a deep trench that was almost 10 feet long. Seeing this scene, First Prince Lu Mingyang frowned, a hint of fear flashing in his eyes. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianqing. His eyes were filled with a cold light. "Brat, it's you again." Nie Hao had dodged a bullet and looked relieved. He hurriedly took a few steps back and stood beside Ji Tianqing. At the same time, his two guards also rushed over. They drew their swords to protect him and stared at Lu Mingyang with murderous intent. Ji Tianqing put away his black dragon sword and stared coldly at Lu Mingyang. He sneered in a mocking tone, "Huh, previously in the inn, you already had bad intentions towards my sister. Now that the auction has failed, you want to kill me on the street and steal my treasure. I would like to know, which aristocratic family are you from? How can you be so despicable and shameless?" Nie Hao also glared at Lu Mingyang and shouted angrily, "Lu Mingyang! You sinister and vicious villain." Even Ji Ku sneered with disdain. "Huh, you look like a human. Unfortunately, you're a beast in human clothing. You're even worse than pigs and dogs." Lu Mingyang was scolded by the three of them in turn. He was so angry that his face turned ashen. The fury in his heart surged, and he wished he could kill the three of them. However, Ji Tianqing's sword strike made him rather fearful. Moreover, the three of them had guards with them, and all of them had extraordinary strength. Moreover, this was the entrance of the Treasure Heaven Pavilion. The matter couldn't be blown out of proportion. Otherwise, it would be difficult to deal with it. Lu Mingyang could only forcefully suppress his anger and killing intent. He glared fiercely at Nie Hao and Ji Tianqing. "I'll remember this grudge. The two of you, wait to suffer my wrath." After gnashing his teeth and throwing down these vicious words, Lu Mingyang turned around and left with his guards. His figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. Nie Hao didn't send his guards to chase after them. He watched Lu Mingyang disappear into the darkness and cursed with anger that hadn't subsided. "Damn bastard. He's so arrogant. I almost fell into his trap." After saying that, he took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He turned to look at Ji Tianqing beside him and bowed sincerely. "Brother Ji, thank you for saving me just now. I owe you another big favor." Chapter 93. On the way back to the inn, Nie Hao and Ji Tianqing rode in the same carriage. Ji Tianqing saw his abnormal expression and guessed that he might have something to say, so he took the initiative to ask. "Brother Nie, do you have something to say?" Nie Hao nodded and said with a face full of guilt, "Brother Ji, I've implicated you in tonight's matter." Ji Tianqing frowned doubtfully and asked with a smile, "It's fate that you and I have met each other. Drawing a sword to help is a small matter. How can you implicate me?" Nie Hao shook his head gently and said in a dignified tone, "Brother Ji is righteous. I, Nie Hao, will remember this kindness in my heart and will definitely repay it in the future. It's just that Lu Mingyang, I'm afraid his origin is extraordinary and his background is deep. I, Nye Hao, am not afraid of his revenge. It's just that Brother Ji, in order to save me, offended him for no reason. I'm afraid there will be trouble in the future. Seeing that Ji Tianqing did not take it seriously, Nye Hao lowered his voice and explained, Brother Ji, you may not know, but the Changfeng country, which is adjacent to our Mao Rong country, has a first prince called Lu Mingyang. It's rumored that the first prince of Changfeng country looks talented, but in fact, he's a despicable, sinister, and unscrupulous bastard. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing suddenly understood. That guy just now is the first prince of Changfeng country? No wonder he's so arrogant and despotic. He's really lawless. I'm not from Changfeng country. Even if he wants to take revenge on me, would he dare to run to my Qinyan country? Ji Tianqing smiled and did not take this matter to heart. Nye Hao was of course not a person who was afraid of trouble. He guessed that Ji Tianqing's family background was extraordinary and his strength was mysterious and powerful, so he did not say anything more. After an hour, the three returned to the inn and went back to their rooms to rest. That night, undercurrents were surging in Fengyang City. However, the inn was safe and sound and no accidents happened. Before going to bed, Ji Tianqing took out the ice dragon armor from the 100 treasures brocade pouch and put it on after a moment of observation. As expected, this armor was as light as a feather. Wearing it didn't feel cumbersome at all, and it didn't affect his movements at all. Moreover, the ice hornless armor was constantly emitting an icy aura, stimulating his meridians and muscles, and subtly strengthening his body. This ice hornless armor not only had a strong defense, but also had the effect of strengthening the body and refreshing the mind. It was very beneficial for cultivation. The 10 million taels of silver he had spent to buy the ice hornless armor was worth it. The next morning, Ji Tianqing had just woken up and washed up when there was a knock on the door. He opened the door and saw that the person knocking on the door was Nye Hao. Nye Hao walked into the room and cupped his hands in greeting towards Ji Tianqing. He then smiled and said, I've disturbed Brother Ji so early in the morning. Please don't take offense. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he took out a stack of banknotes from his sleeve and returned them to Ji Tianqing with both hands. Brother Ji, thank you for helping me out last night. I knew that you were leaving Fengyang City today, so I asked my subordinates to gather 10 million taels overnight. Ji Tianqing was a little surprised. He didn't expect Nye Hao to be in such a hurry to return the money. He could see that Nye Hao owed him a favor, so he felt a little uneasy. Therefore, he accepted the banknotes and said with concern, Brother Nye, that 10,000 spirit jade pillow is a hot potato. You have to deal with it as soon as possible. Nye Hao smiled and said, Thank you for your concern, Brother Ji. I already asked the guards to send it home last night. The two of them chatted for a while more before Nye Hao cupped his hands and bid farewell. After breakfast, Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku left the inn and continued on their journey. After the carriage left Fengyang City, it continued to rush towards the north. Fengyang City was located at the southern border of Hengchuan country, while the Star Ancient Realm was located at the northern border of Hengchuan country. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku had to cross the entire Hengchuan country. They had to travel for 6 days before they could leave the country. The journey was quite peaceful and there were no twists and turns. After 6 days, Ji Tianqing and the others left Hengchuan country. At noon the next day, the carriage finally arrived at the entrance of the Star Ancient Realm. The Star Ancient Realm was a mysterious and wonderful place. It was said that it was a special space opened up by an ancient almighty. It was extremely vast and its territory was comparable to half a country. The entrance was on a mountain peak that was 3,000 meters tall. It was impossible for ordinary people to find it. The two carriages stopped at the foot of the mountain. There was no road ahead. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku alighted from the carriage and stood on the grass, looking up at the mountain peak in front of them. The accompanying coachman and guards carried their luggage down from the carriage. Originally, the guards were going to help Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku carry their luggage and send them to the Sky Pillar sect before returning to Qinyan country. However, Ji Tianqing told them to return and there was no need to send them back. After the carriage left, only Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku were left on the grass. There were also 4 large boxes containing their luggage. Ji Ku looked at the luggage and couldn't help but worry. Big brother Tianqing, what should we do with these luggage? Do we have to carry them and climb the mountain? Hee, there's no need for that. Ji Tianqing smiled and took out his 100 treasures brocade pouch to put the luggage inside. All right, we should go into the mountain. After saying that, he led Ji Ku into the mountain. Ji Ku saw him wave his hand and the 4 boxes disappeared. She immediately widened her eyes in surprise. She hurriedly chased after Ji Tianqing and held his arm to ask him how he did it. Ji Tianqing explained the wonderful use of the 100 treasures brocade pouch to her. She suddenly understood and praised it. 2 hours later, the two of them followed the bluestone path in the mountain and climbed to the peak of the mountain. There was a wide platform at the peak of the mountain. The ground was paved with black boulders. The boulders on the ground were modeled with the vicissitudes of life. It was unknown how long they had been etched by wind and frost. There were ravines and lines carved on the boulders. There were many crisscrossing strange lines that formed a huge array. Around the array, there were 12 young cultivators wearing blue robes and carrying swords on their backs. These people were all at the mystic enlightening realm. Their eyes shone brightly and their bodies exuded confidence and arrogance. Ji Tianqing glanced at them. These people's robes were of the same style and had the same pattern embroidered on their chests. There were 2 crossed swords in the pattern and a circle of stars around them. It was obviously the symbol of the Sky Pillar sect. He immediately understood that these 12 young cultivators were disciples of the Sky Pillar sect. They were ordered to guard the entrance of the ancient star realm. Sure enough, the leading young cultivator walked over and asked in a dignified voice, "Who are you? Why are you here?" Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku quickly took out their identity tokens and presented them to the young cultivator. "Senior Martial Brother, we are new disciples who have just entered the Sky Pillar sect. These are our identity tokens." The young cultivator took the 2 tokens and looked at them. His expression eased slightly. He nodded and said, "So it's new junior martial brothers and sisters. Wait a moment. When I open the entrance to the ancient realm, you can enter. There will be other senior martial brothers inside to receive you." Chapter 94. A moment later, the 12 Sky Pillar sect disciples joined forces to open the array at the entrance of the ancient realm. In the middle of the array, an oval-shaped door of white light appeared out of thin air. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku cupped their hands and thanked the disciples before stepping into the door of white light. Whoosh! The 2 of them only saw a white light flash in front of their eyes before they arrived in another world. Beneath their feet was a path paved with dark brown stone slabs. The slabs were modeled with traces of the vicissitudes of time. On both sides of the path was a green grassland with many small flowers of various colors, attracting many bees and butterflies to fly back and forth. Further away was a lush forest, as well as an endless stretch of mountains. The sun was shining brightly in the dark blue sky, but there wasn't the slightest bit of heat in the air. Instead, there was a cool breeze blowing, and there was a refreshing fragrance in the air. This was the Star Ancient Realm, a cultivation holy land that was like a paradise. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku both felt their pores open just by standing in the Star Ancient Realm. They felt indescribably comfortable and refreshed. At this moment, 2 young martial artists wearing blue robes walked in front of the 2 of them. The 2 young warriors cupped their hands and said calmly, "You 2 should be new junior brothers and junior sisters, right?" Ji Tianqing knew that these 2 were the disciples of the Sky Pillar sect, so he smiled and nodded. The 2 disciples looked at their identity tokens and led them towards the distant mountain. "Junior brother, junior sister, please follow us." Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku hurriedly followed the 2 disciples and walked forward along the black stone path. The black stone path was actually more than 20 miles long. It followed the foot of several mountains and connected to a mountain peak that was 3,000 meters tall. This mountain peak was the head of the surrounding mountains. Not only was it the highest, but it also had the most majestic aura and the densest heaven-earth yuan qi. Without a doubt, this mountain peak was where the Sky Pillar sect was located. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku stood at the foot of the mountain and looked up. They were immediately shocked by the majestic atmosphere of the Sky Pillar sect. At the foot of the mountain was a huge square with a radius of nearly 10,000 meters. On both sides stood 99 white stone pillars that reached the sky. A huge staircase that was 20 meters wide extended from the foot of the mountain to the middle of the mountain. The dark green stone steps exuded an ancient aura. It was unknown how many years of wind and frost had been etched on it. The two disciples led Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku along the stone steps to the middle of the mountain. As they walked, they introduced the Sky Pillar sect's situation to the two. Junior brother, junior sister, being able to stand out from your respective countries and enter our Sky Pillar sect is the greatest fortune of your lives. Our Sky Pillar sect has been established for 1,000 years. It is the #1 sect in the Heavenly Stellar region and governs the 10 countries of the Heavenly Stellar region. Our sect's disciples are respected beyond compare no matter which country they go to. Ji Ku saw that the two disciples' attitudes were relatively friendly, so she asked, "Senior brothers, our Sky Pillar sect occupies an entire mountain. Isn't there a lot of disciples in the sect?" One of the disciples smiled and explained, "Junior sister, our Sky Pillar sect doesn't just occupy this mountain peak. This Sky Pillar peak is only where our sect is located." The other disciple added, "Behind this Sky Pillar peak, there are 8 connected peaks. All of them are our Sky Pillar sect's territory." According to the senior brothers in the sect founder used these 9 peaks as the foundation to construct a mountain-protecting formation called Sky Pillar to protect the entire sect. At this point, the two disciples revealed a look of yearning, and their eyes were also surging with pride. Clearly, they were proud to be disciples of the Sky Pillar sect. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku were also shocked and revealed expressions of disbelief. If the 9 peaks are connected, doesn't that mean it exceeds a radius of 100 miles? Our sect's founder can actually use the 9 peaks as the foundation to set up a great formation? Heavens! The sect founder actually had such a remarkable method. It's simply like a legend. The two disciples nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "That's for sure. Otherwise, how could our Sky Pillar sect become the #1 sect in the Heavenly Sky region?" The 4 of them chatted as they walked and unknowingly arrived at the mountainside. At the end of the stone steps was a huge mountain gate that was 100 meters tall. It was completely built with black boulders. The words, Sky Pillar sect, were engraved on the lintel of the mountain gate. Every word was written with iron and silver hooks. The strokes were swift and fierce, revealing a vigorous and domineering aura. Under the mountain gate, on the left and right sides of the stone steps stood 18 young disciples in white robes. Ji Tianqing silently sensed and discovered that every disciple had the strength of the Mystic Comprehending Realm. Mystic Comprehending Realm disciples have to guard the mountain gate in the Sky Pillar sect? He was somewhat shocked and felt that the Sky Pillar sect's deep foundation was even more unfathomable. After everyone crossed the mountain gate, they arrived at a huge square. This square had a radius of 1,000 meters and the ground was paved with white stone slabs. It was flat and clean. Many young male and female disciples were walking through the square. All of them were in a hurry and did not linger. On the left and right sides of the square, there were many tall buildings and courtyards that were stacked on top of each other. They stretched as far as the eye could see. The two disciples stopped in the square and introduced the situation to Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku. "Junior brother, junior sister, this is the outer sect's meeting square. Usually, important matters or gatherings in the outer sect will be held here. The buildings on the left and right sides of the square are the residences of the outer sect disciples. There are more than 2,000 outer sect disciples in total. The palaces and houses on the mountain peak are the residences of the inner sect disciples and deacons. Normally, you must not enter without permission. Otherwise, you will be punished." After a brief introduction of the situation, the two disciples led Ji Tianqing and Ji Ku to the courtyard on the right side of the square. The induction ceremony will be held in 3 days. Today, I will take you to the new blue courtyard to stay temporarily. After the induction ceremony, you will be assigned a residence. Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku followed the 2 disciples and entered a courtyard called the new blue courtyard. There were hundreds of rooms in the new blue courtyard. There were already 70 to 80 people living in them. Only 20 or so rooms were still empty. Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku chose 2 adjacent rooms to stay in. After they packed their luggage, they settled down temporarily. The new blue courtyard was specially designed to settle down new disciples. The 100 new disciples from the 10 countries of the Tianshan region were temporarily staying here, waiting for the induction ceremony in 3 days. In the next 2 days, more than 20 people were successively led to the new blue courtyard. The 100 new disciples had finally arrived. These 100 people were all young geniuses from various countries. Regardless of whether they were men or women, they were all handsome and dignified. During these 3 days, everyone stayed in their rooms to rest. Very few people showed their faces in public. Chapter 95. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today was the day of the induction ceremony for the new disciples. Early in the morning, the hundreds of new disciples in New Blue Courtyard had finished washing up and were ready. When the sun rose from the east, an outer sect deacon entered New Blue Courtyard and issued an order in a dignified voice. All new disciples are to gather in the courtyard immediately and await the arrival of the outer sect elders and deacons of the 3 courtyards. The outer sect deacon's voice spread throughout New Blue Courtyard, and the new disciples in the hundreds of rooms immediately opened their doors and gathered in the courtyard. Although they were all young geniuses of various countries and had distinguished statuses, they were still arrogant. When they arrived at the Sky Pillar sect, they restrained their arrogance and did not dare to be negligent. Especially today, when they were about to hold the induction ceremony, they did not dare to leave the slightest bad impression on the outer sect elders and deacons. In just a short span of 100 breaths, the hundreds of new disciples stood in the courtyard and waited respectfully. Not long after, a white-haired old man in purple robes entered New Blue Courtyard with 3 middle-aged deacons in black robes. Everyone could see that the dignified old man in purple robes was the outer sect elder. And among the 3 middle-aged deacons, Ji Tianxing recognized one of them. Han Xiaosheng. Han Xiaosheng was the one who presided over the entrance competition in the imperial city of Green Cloud. The outer sect elder walked to the center of the courtyard and stood on the high platform in the north, looking down at the new disciples. After sizing up everyone, he nodded slightly, revealing a satisfied expression, and opened his mouth to speak. I am Chu Huaishan, an outer sect elder in charge of more than 2,400 outer sect disciples and all outer sect matters. You are all young geniuses of various countries. Perhaps some of you have outstanding talent, some of you have extraordinary backgrounds, and some of you have great wealth, but no matter what, you are all outer sect disciples of the Sky Pillar sect now that you have entered our sect. All the fame and fortune in the secular world are useless here. You can only rely on your talent and hard work. You only have one thing to do, and that is to become stronger. Become stronger. Only those with outstanding talent and great strength are qualified to be nurtured and valued by the sect. As for those who are unmotivated or untalented, they will be demoted to odd jobs or expelled from the sect. Chu Huaishan's voice was like a resounding bell, striking the hearts of everyone present. His tone was sonorous and powerful. Moreover, it was filled with an inspiring force that caused the blood of over 100 new disciples to boil. At the same time, his short words revealed the laws of the Sky Pillar sect and the martial Tao world. Survival of the fittest. Only with great strength could one be nurtured and respected by others. After that, Chu Huaishan personally presided over the initiation ceremony. After a simple but dignified ceremony, the hundreds of new disciples were officially accepted into the sect. Chu Huaishan announced loudly, the outer sect is divided into 3 courtyards, the White Dew Courtyard, the River Flow Courtyard, and the Wind and Cloud Courtyard. According to your ranking in the entrance competition, those who ranked 5th to 10th will enter the White Dew Academy to learn cultivation. The second to fourth places will enter the Jianglu Academy to study and cultivate. Only the number one disciple of each country can enter the Tempest Courtyard. Next, the deacons of the 3 courtyards will distribute the spoils. After saying that, Chu Huaishan left the new blue courtyard. The hundreds of new disciples in the courtyard all understood Chu Huaishan's meaning, and their expressions were somewhat complicated. It was obvious that the treatment and training that ordinary disciples received when they entered the White Dew courtyard would definitely be the most ordinary. Only the disciples with excellent aptitude could enter the Jianglu Academy to cultivate and receive better treatment. As for the Tempest courtyard, only the number one genius of each country could enter and would receive the best treatment and training. The outer sect was divided into 3 courtyards. The disciples were divided into 3 classes according to their aptitude and talent, and received different treatment and training. From this point alone, it could be seen that the competition within the Sky Pillar sect was fierce and the hierarchy was strict. The first person to ascend the platform was a deacon of the White Dew courtyard. This person held the register and read out the names of 60 new disciples in a row. The 60 new disciples, including Ji Ku, walked out of the crowd and gathered in front of the platform. After the deacon finished reading the register, he led the 60 people to leave the new blue courtyard and head to the White Dew courtyard. The number of people in the courtyard suddenly decreased by more than half. The deacon of the Jianglu courtyard ascended the platform again and read out the names of 29 people with the register. These 29 people included Jian Wusheng and Wei Lingfeng, but what puzzled Ji Tianqing was that the name of the young prince, Ji Ling, wasn't there. A moment later, the deacon of the Jianglu courtyard left with the 29 disciples. Only Ji Tianqing and the 9 new disciples were left in the courtyard, and it became empty. Ji Tianqing and the 9 disciples beside him were obviously going to enter the Tempest courtyard. But what he didn't understand was that Ji Ling was also among them. What surprised him even more was that when he glanced at the 9 new disciples, he saw an acquaintance. The young man he met by chance in Fengyang City, the grandson of Marshal Qinkuan, Nie Hao. Ji Tianqing immediately understood. When he met Nie Hao in Fengyang City, Nie Hao also came to the Sky Pillar sect to report. It was just that neither of them mentioned entering the Sky Pillar sect, so they didn't know that the other party was a new disciple of the Sky Pillar sect. Nie Hao must be first place in Mao Ronggua's competition, so he stayed in the courtyard and waited to enter the Tempest courtyard. When Ji Tianqing and Nie Hao separated in Fengyang City, he thought that they would never see each other again. He didn't expect to meet Nie Hao again in the Sky Pillar sect. Moreover, both of them were first place in their respective countries and were going to enter the Tempest courtyard to cultivate at the same time. Ji Tianqing sighed inwardly. Fate was really wonderful. Nie Hao also saw him and was stunned for a moment. Then, he revealed a smile and nodded to him. At this time, the deacon of the Tempest courtyard ascended the platform and calmly looked at everyone. He said, "I am Han Xiusheng, the deacon of the Tempest courtyard. From now on, the 10 of you will enter the Tempest courtyard and I will teach you." Everyone bowed to Han Xiusheng and respectfully said, "Disciple greets Deacon Han." Han Xiusheng nodded slightly and motioned for everyone to get up. He calmly explained, "Among the 10 of you, 9 are the number one geniuses of their respective countries, except for Ji Ling. Lu Mingyang, the number one of Changfeng country, broke through to the mystic comprehending realm in the entrance competition. Therefore, after he entered the sect, he directly entered the inner sect to cultivate. The vacant spot will be filled by Ji Ling." After Han Xiusheng explained, Ji Tianqing suddenly realized. However, he secretly guessed that there was another reason why Ji Ling was allowed to fill this spot instead of the second place of another country. It was very likely that Ji Ling was the person the Sky Pillar sect was looking for, so there was such preferential treatment. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing secretly clenched his fists and murmured in his heart, "I didn't expect that Ji Ling would enter the Tempest courtyard with me and cultivate together in the future. In that case, I will cultivate diligently and ruthlessly trample him under my feet." Chapter 96. Han Xiusheng was still on the platform, explaining the rules of the Tempest courtyard as well as the generous treatment everyone would receive. Ji Tianqing recalled what Han Xiusheng had said before and frowned slightly. That was because he heard a familiar name. Lu Mingyang. He clearly remembered that at that time in Fengyang City, the handsome youth who wanted to strike up a conversation with Ji Ku and kill him on the street for his treasure was called Lu Mingyang. If it wasn't a coincidence, then this was definitely bad news. He and Nia Hao had both offended Lu Mingyang. Not only was Lu Mingyang the crown prince of Changfeng Nation, but he was also an inner disciple of the Sky-Bearing sect. In the future, everyone would be in the Sky-Bearing sect and would meet sooner or later. Ji Tianxing didn't doubt that with Lu Mingyang's despicable and shameless personality, he would definitely retaliate against him and Nia Hao. Although he wasn't afraid of trouble, this was undoubtedly a potential threat and trouble. Thinking of this, he turned his head and glanced at Nia Hao not far away. Nia Hao was also looking at him with a strange look in his eyes and expression. Clearly, Nia Hao had also realized this problem. Not long after, Han Xiuxing finished speaking and led Ji Tianxing and the others out of the courtyard, heading towards the Tempest Courtyard in the outer sect. The Tempest Courtyard had a special position in the outer sect as it specialized in cultivating genius disciples. Therefore, the Tempest Courtyard was located halfway up the mountain on the left side of the conference square. It was a spacious and quiet courtyard. Ji Tianxing, Nia Hao, and the others were led by Han Xiuxing out of the new blue courtyard and through the conference square. At this time, there were many young disciples gathered in groups of 2s and 3s in the conference square, sizing up the new disciples. Especially Ji Tianxing, Nia Hao, and the others. They were all geniuses who wanted to enter the Tempest Courtyard and were more eye-catching than ordinary new disciples. In the corner of the square stood a young disciple wearing a white robe. This person was tall and sturdy with a handsome and resolute face, but his eyes were as cold as ice as he stared at Ji Tianxing in the crowd. Seeing Ji Tianxing following behind Han Xiaoxing, crossing the square and heading in the direction of the storm courtyard, his eyes surged with dense killing intent. He secretly clenched his fists and roared with grief and indignation in his heart, Ji Tianxing. Today was supposed to be the day I reunited with my cousin. I waited for her in the Sky Pillar sect for 3 years. You bastard, how dare you kill my cousin? I will never let you off. Thinking of this, the beautiful figure of his cousin Ling Yunfei appeared in his mind, and his eyes surged with deep sorrow and anger. After a long time, when Ji Tianxing and the others left the square, the burly young man still stood there, unwilling to leave. At this moment, an inner disciple who was also wearing a white robe walked up to him and greeted him with a smile. Senior Marshal Brother Jianyu, why did you come to the outer sect? What are you looking at? The tall and sturdy young man named Jianyu came back to his senses, and restrained the grief and anger in his eyes. He glanced at the disciple beside him and said calmly, "There are new disciples today, so I came to take a look." Jianyu gave a perfunctory reply, then turned around and left. Han Xiuxing led Ji Tianxing and the others into the storm courtyard. They passed through the spacious courtyard and entered the conference hall. In the magnificent conference hall, there was already a black-robed deacon waiting for them. After Han Xiuxing's introduction, everyone learned that this black-robed deacon was called Du Wu. He was Han Xiuxing's deputy and also the second instructor of the storm courtyard. From now on, the learning and cultivation of Ji Tianxing, Nia Hao, and the others would be taught by Han Xiuxing and Du Wu. After everyone greeted Du Wu, he took out 10 sets of green robes and books that he had prepared beforehand and distributed them to everyone. The 10 sets of green robes were everyone's disciple uniforms. The 10 books were the Sky Pillar Sect's entry cultivation method, the Green Pine Tactic. Ji Tianxing understood one thing from his previous observation. In the Sky Pillar sect, those who wore green robes were outer sect disciples, those who wore white robes were inner sect disciples, and those who wore black robes were deacons. Different colored robes represented different identities, and they could not be worn carelessly. This made him sigh in his heart. As expected of an ancient sect with thousands of years of history, there were too many rules and regulations. Next, Du Wu distributed everyone's living quarters. The storm courtyard was spacious, occupying a radius of 1,000 meters. The courtyard was almost as big as the Ji residence, and there were over 100 rooms for people to live in. Thus, each of the 10 disciples was assigned an individual room. Moreover, each room was equipped with a secret cultivation room. This was a treatment that ordinary disciples did not have. After everyone settled down, they changed into green robes and gathered in the conference hall. After everyone had gathered, Han Xiusheng solemnly announced something. Everyone, our storm courtyard is the #1 outer sect courtyard. We only nurture the most talented martial artists. Currently, there are only 10 of you in the storm courtyard. You have the best resources and treatment, but you also have to bear the heaviest tasks and pressure. There is still half a year before the inner sect examination. Your first task is to reach the mystic comprehending realm within half a year and pass the inner sect examination to become an inner sect disciple. The inner sect examination is held once every 2 years. If you miss the examination in half a year, you will have to wait for another 2 years. After hearing Han Xiusheng's words, Ji Tianxing, Nie Hao, and the rest's expressions changed, and they all frowned. Obviously, this task was too difficult, causing everyone to feel a great deal of pressure. Nie Hao hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands and bowed to Han Xiusheng. He asked, Deacon Han, although the 10 of us are the champions of each country's large competition, everyone's strength is around the 7th level of the true energy realm. How can we reach the mystic comprehending realm in half a year? Han Xiusheng nodded slightly, and said calmly, what Nie Hao said should be the same question in all of your hearts, right? Everyone nodded in agreement. They all felt that this was an impossible task. Han Xiusheng's gaze swept across the crowd, and he revealed a playful smile. To reach the mystic comprehending realm from the 7th level of the true energy realm in half a year, this is indeed an impossible task for ordinary disciples. But the 10 of you are the champions of each country's large competition, and in this half a year, you have cultivated in the storm courtyard and received the best treatment and guidance. If you still can't reach the mystic comprehending realm, then it proves that you are mediocre. You are not worthy of the sect's nurturing and guidance. Hearing these words, everyone lowered their heads slightly, and a trace of shame appeared in their eyes. At the same time, everyone clenched their fists, and secretly swore in their hearts that no matter what, they would complete the task and reach the mystic comprehending realm in half a year. Han Xiusheng revealed a gratified smile when he saw that they were not depressed, but instead had their fighting spirit aroused. After half a year, the storm courtyard will be closed and no longer teach disciples. At that time, those disciples who have not reached the mystic comprehending realm and have not passed the inner sect examination will be sent to the Jianglu courtyard to continue cultivating. Those who are sent to the Jianglu courtyard will have to bear the criticism and ridicule of the other disciples. You can consider it yourselves. Therefore, I hope that the 10 of you can reach the mystic comprehending realm and pass the examination to become inner sect disciples. Not only that, in this half a year, you will have a monthly examination every month. The contents of the monthly examination are also what you need to learn during the month. Chapter 97. It was noon and the sun was blazing high in the sky. The air was hot and dry, and it was easy to get sleepy. However, Ji Tianxing, Nie Hao, and the others couldn't go back to their rooms to rest. They all stood in the meeting hall and listened to Han Xiusheng's teachings. Han Xiusheng sat at the head of the hall and spoke with a solemn expression. The cultivation of the martial way is mainly based on martial skills and cultivation methods, but it also needs to be supplemented by the Tao of pills, the Tao of formations, and the Tao of forging. This is very similar to alchemy. It's also very particular about a ruler, a minister, and an assistant. There must be a main ingredient and auxiliary ingredient complementing each other in order to successfully refine an elixir. Therefore, your mission this month is to learn how to refine elixirs. I don't expect all of you to be proficient in alchemy and become alchemy masters in the future. However, you must know how to refine elixirs, which will be very helpful to your martial cultivation in the future. Your mission this month is to refine the spirit-nourishing elixir, green jade elixir, and heart-nourishing elixir with your own hands. These 3 elixirs are all top-grade origin-level elixirs. When the time comes, whoever can refine the highest grade elixir will receive an extra reward. Hearing these two sentences, Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and the others all showed a difficult expression and felt a great deal of pressure. They had never learned alchemy and only had a superficial understanding of alchemy. Top-grade origin-level elixirs could only be refined by experts above the 7th level of the true energy realm. Moreover, it would take at least a year of study and experimentation to refine them. Even if they were martial geniuses, to learn alchemy and refine the 3 top-grade origin-level elixirs in a month was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, among the 10, there were 2 disciples who smiled confidently and seemed to have a card up their sleeves. One of them was skinny and short, and his age was similar to Ji Tianqing's. This person was called Shi Jingsheng, born in a family of alchemy in the spiritual mountain country. At a young age, he had great attainments in alchemy and had refined several top-grade origin-level elixirs. The other person was tall and sturdy, with skin as dark as charcoal. A pair of bell-sized eyes flashed with a fierce light. This person was called Emo, from the imperial family of the Blackwater country. He had been interested in alchemy since childhood and had a certain foundation in alchemy. Han Xiaoxing's eyes were like torches. Of course, Shi Jingsheng and Emo's faces couldn't escape his eyes. He glanced at the 2 of them and said with a smile, Shi Jingsheng, Emo, it seems that both of you have a foundation in alchemy, so you don't feel any pressure from this task. However, I want to tell you that the spirit-nourishing pill, azure jade pill, and heart-nourishing pill that you want to refine are all secret pills of my sky-bearing sect. They are different from the pills of the mortal kingdoms. Even if the 2 of you have a foundation in alchemy and have a higher chance of winning than the others, you still have to study and comprehend diligently. Shi Jingsheng and Emo restrained their complacent expressions, hurriedly cupped their fists and saluted, saying, "We will follow Deacon Han's instructions." Subsequently, Han Xiaoxing had Du Wu take out 10 thick ancient books and distributed them to Ji Tianqing and the others. The black ancient book was very heavy. It was as thick as a brick, and the words, "Thousand Medicine Collection," were written on the cover. Han Xiaoxing said in a deep voice, "If you want to learn alchemy, you must first learn how to recognize herbs. Your first week's task is to memorize the 3,000 herbs in this 1,000 medicine collection. There is a spirit medicine garden in the back mountain. If you want to quickly recognize herbs, you can use your identity token to go to the spirit medicine garden to study. However, you must not pick a single blade of grass or flower. Otherwise, you will be punished by the sect's rules." After saying this, Han Xiaoxing had everyone withdraw and do their own things. The rules of the Tempest Courtyard were as such. Other than when the 2 deacons were teaching or when there was an announcement, everyone had to gather in the main hall. At other times, the disciples could do as they pleased. As long as they didn't violate the sect's rules or barge into forbidden areas, no one would interfere. Of course, Han Xiaoxing had just announced this month's goal and this week's learning content. Everyone knew that the task was difficult and felt heavy pressure. How could they dare to waste time? Ji Tianqing and Nie Hao walked out of the main hall side by side. After exchanging a few words in the courtyard, they returned to their rooms to study. Ji Ling was the last to walk out of the main hall. As he walked, he asked Han Xiaoxing about his experience in alchemy. Han Xiaoxing's attitude towards him was very amiable and answered all his questions. After Ji Ling obtained a satisfactory answer, he cupped his hands and thanked Han Xiaoxing before returning to his room. After Ji Tianqing returned to his room, he didn't pay attention to what was happening outside. He held the 1,000 medicine collection and earnestly read it. The afternoon unknowingly passed by. At dusk, several odd-job disciples carried food boxes into the Tempest Courtyard to deliver dinner to the 10 disciples. The Tempest Courtyard's disciples were treated well. This could be seen from the ingredients for dinner. Although there wasn't much for dinner, there was only a bowl of rice, a bowl of meat dishes, and a can of meat soup. However, these ingredients were very precious. They were spirit rice produced in the Sky Pillar Sect's spirit fields and the meat of monster beasts raised in the beast garden. Eating these meals every day that contained origin chi could quickly strengthen a cultivator's physique and imperceptibly increase their strength. The odd job disciple that delivered the food to Ji Tianqing was a 12 or 13-year-old boy. He was thin and pale, but he looked quite clever. The boy's name was Xiaofeng. When he first met Ji Tianqing, he was somewhat reserved, as if he was afraid of this genius disciple of the Tempest Courtyard. Ji Tianqing had a friendly look on his face as he chatted with him for a while. Only then did he know what was going on. It turned out that odd job disciples had a very low status in the Sky Pillar sect. They were all treated as servants by the official disciples. In particular, some genius disciples looked down on the odd job disciples. They would scold and beat them up if they felt the slightest disrespect. Xiaofeng once delivered food to a certain Tempest Courtyard disciple. He only coughed a few times while eating and was beaten half to death by that disciple. He was bedridden for half a month. If odd job disciples wanted to have dignity and freedom, there were only two paths they could take. They could either reach the 5th level of the True Element realm and pass the Outer Disciple exam to become an Outer Disciple. Or they could do 10 years of hard labor. When the 10 years were up, they would be expelled from the Sky Pillar sect and return to the mortal world. In short, there were many rules in the Sky Pillar sect. The strong and the weak could be seen everywhere. The strong were respected and the weak were lowly. After eating dinner, Ji Tianqing felt that his essence qi was abundant. There was surging origin qi in his body. He entered the secret cultivation room, activated the spirit gathering array in the secret cultivation room, and began to cultivate. After a night of cultivation, he felt that his cultivation had increased by a bit the next morning. The sword embryo in his body had also grown a bit stronger. The treatment at the Tempest Courtyard is really good. The ingredients are of a higher grade than what I ate at the Ji residence. The effects are also several times stronger. Although I'm only at the 5th level of the True Element realm, at this speed, I might be able to reach the Profound Comprehension realm within half a year. After Ji Tianqing finished cultivating, he calculated in his mind. He was filled with confidence and anticipation for the next half a year of cultivation. Yesterday, I looked through the 1,000 medicine collection. Although I memorized several hundred types of herbs, I didn't see the real thing. In the end, my memory isn't deep. Today, I'm going to the Spirit Herb Garden. I need to compare the herbs to deepen my memory. Chapter 98. The sun rose from the east and shone warm sunlight on the Sky Pillar Peak. Early in the morning, when Ji Tianqing walked out of his room, he saw that there were already a few disciples in the courtyard. Some were reading the 1,000 medicine collection under the gazebo or under the tree, while others were practicing their sword techniques in the courtyard. There were also some who were sitting on the roof in a meditative posture, breathing and cultivating the essence energy of heaven and earth. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but smile playfully. After all, they're all young people who are the top geniuses of the various nations. They all have different personalities and some strange hobbies. Yesterday, everyone just joined the sect and was still rather reserved. Now that they've settled down and understood the rules of the sect, they've all become more relaxed. He muttered a few words in his heart and walked out of the Wind Cloud Courtyard with the 1,000 medicine collection, heading to the spiritual herbal garden at the back of the mountain. It was a full 5 kilometers from the Wind Cloud Courtyard to the spiritual herbal garden at the back of the mountain, and there were tree-lined paths along the way. Ji Tianqing walked on the tree-lined path and would occasionally encounter some outer or inner sect disciples. The disciples walked in groups of 2s and 3s, discussing the essence of martial arts, the mysteries of pills, and so on. When he passed by a combat arena at the back of the mountain, he saw 2 inner sect disciples of the Mystic Mastery realm sparring on the stage. Even without using weapons, the fight was very exciting. There was a circle of disciples around the combat arena who were all watching the sparring. From time to time, some of them would discuss a few words, seemingly having comprehended some tricks. Although Ji Tianqing had only joined the sect for 2 days, he could feel the strong learning and competitive atmosphere in the sect through what he had seen and heard in the past 2 days. After all, the young elites of the 10 nations were gathered in the Sky Pillar sect where there were many geniuses and powerhouses. Everyone wanted to fly to the 9 heavens and become a martial arts powerhouse that everyone respected. Who would be willing to crawl in the mud and be humiliated and looked down upon by others? The entrance of the spiritual herbal garden was not only protected by an array formation, but there were also 8 inner sect disciples of the mystic mastery realm guarding it. Ji Tianqing walked to the gate and showed his identity token before being allowed to enter. He carried the 1,000 medicine collection and crossed the gate. As soon as he entered the spiritual herbal garden, he smelled the fragrance of various plants, flowers, and fruits. There were all kinds of flowers, fruits, and trees planted all over the mountains. They were all spiritual herbs and miraculous herbs. Usually, there were disciples in charge of taking care of the spiritual herbal garden, and the various herbs in the garden were planted according to their categories. There was a 2-meter-tall stone tablet erected at the edge of each nursery, and there were names of various medicinal herbs. Medicinal collection and medicinal herbs and medicinal herbs and medicinal herbs and medicinal herbs and medicinal herbs, and would stop and observe them for a long time. Medicinal herbs and the herbs and medicinal herbs and the herbs and the herbs of the mystic realm. Of the mystic medicines, mystic heavens, and the my mystic realm was mystic Miang, was mystic stick pillar, mystic garden, mystic realm, my mystic realm, mystic my mystic realm, mystic and mystic garden, mystic of the mystic garden, my mystic. The mission that Deacon Han gave us was to memorize more than 3,000 types of medicinal herbs within a week, and to be able to tell the characteristics and effects of each medicinal herb. At my current speed, I can only identify 600 herbs a day. In a week, I can barely identify 3,000 herbs, but I might not be able to remember all of them. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing frowned and was a little worried. He closed the 1,000 medicine collection and prepared to find a place to sit down and rest for a while. He sized up his surroundings a few times before realizing that he had unknowingly arrived at the depths of the medicinal garden. He was currently at the side of a jade lake surrounded by willows. The surface of the lake was wide, and the clear, dark green water rippled as a cool breeze blew. The lakeside was filled with tall, green willow trees. Thousands of green willow branches hung down and swayed gently with the breeze, like the slender hands of a young girl, gently fiddling with the lake water. Such a delightful scene made Ji Tianqing's mood much better, and his mind much more relaxed. He carried the 1,000 medicine collection to the lakeside, and was about to sit down on a stone bench under a willow tree to rest. At this time, he suddenly saw a young girl in a green dress standing under the willow tree next to him. The young girl's back was graceful, and her green dress fluttered gently with the breeze. She looked particularly pure and beautiful. Even if he couldn't see the young girl's face, Ji Tianqing could guess that she must be a gentle beauty just by looking at her slim back. The young girl was staring at the lake, as if she was thinking or remembering something. Suddenly, she heard Ji Tianqing's footsteps. She came back to her senses and turned to look at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing and her eyes met. He immediately saw her face, and couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Just as he had imagined, the young girl in the green dress had a pure and beautiful face, and her white and translucent skin was sparkling and translucent like jade. Under the neat bangs covering her forehead, there was a pair of willow leaf eyebrows, and a pair of big watery eyes, which were as clear as the lake water. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, but she was not cold and arrogant. Instead, she was very gentle and demure, and had a kind of delicate temperament. Ji Tianqing didn't know why, but the young girl in the green dress made him feel a sense of closeness from the bottom of his heart, and he also had a desire to protect her. She was not as cold and arrogant as Yunyao, who was otherworldly and could only be seen from afar. After Ji Tianqing came back to his senses, he bowed to the young girl in the green dress and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I'm just passing by and want to sit down and rest for a while. If I've disturbed you, please forgive me, Junior sister." When it came to addressing her, he hesitated. The young girl in the green dress was neither a green-robed outer disciple, nor a white-robed inner disciple, which made it difficult for Ji Tianqing to distinguish her identity. Seeing that she was young, he could only call her junior sister. The young girl in the green dress nodded slightly and showed a touch of a smile. She was very gentle. It's okay, I'm just here to relax. It's not disturbing. After that, she glanced at the 1,000 medicine collection in Ji Tianqing's hand, and asked with a smile, "Are you an outer disciple who came to the medicine garden to learn to identify herbs?" Ji Tianqing nodded and answered truthfully, "My name is Ji Tianqing, and I'm a new disciple who just entered the sect. I'm taught by Deacon Han, and I'm here to learn the way of alchemy." The two chatted under the willow tree and exchanged names. The young girl in the green dress was called Xian Xian. She claimed that everyone usually called her junior sister, so Ji Tianqing changed the way he addressed her as junior sister Xian Xian. Xian Xian did not reveal her identity, and also tacitly agreed to this name. Through the conversation, Ji Tianqing learned that Xian Xian used to learn alchemy under Han Xiaoxing's tutelage. In order to memorize the herbs in the 1,000 medicine collection, she also came to the medicine garden to learn every day. Later, she came to the medicine garden many times, and liked this place with pleasant scenery. She often came to the lake to relax or stare blankly. It was unknown whether it was Xian Xian's personality or some other reason, but she seemed to have a sense of closeness with Ji Tianqing. After the two chatted for a while, she actually took the initiative to help Ji Tianqing learn to identify herbs. After all, she could recite the 1,000 medicine collection backwards, and she knew the thousands of herbs in the medicine garden like the back of her hand. She could casually mention the characteristics and effects of any herb. Chapter 99. Since Xian Xian was willing to help him, how could Ji Tianqing refuse? After he bowed and thanked Xian Xian, he followed her around the herb garden and listened to her introduce each and every herb. This dark purple herb is called the purple heart bamboo and is a rare spiritual herb. It needs to grow for 9 years before it can be used to refine pills. It can be used to refine various types of profound pills that can calm the mind. This blue herb is called the ice moon flower and only blooms on the night of the full moon. It is mainly used to refine the ice moon profound pill and can increase one's cultivation. Xian Xian introduced the various herbs as she walked and suddenly saw Ji Tianqing close to a beautiful spiritual flower, and she hurriedly reminded him. "Tianqing, don't touch that bone-dissolving grass. It looks beautiful, but it actually contains poison. If you touch it, it will corrode your flesh and bones." Hearing her gentle voice, Ji Tianqing hurriedly retracted his hand and gave her a grateful smile. Xian Xian continued, "Actually, there are over 3,000 herbs in this herb garden and many of them are poisonous. Some even contain poison. When you are identifying the herbs in the herb garden, you must not casually touch those herbs. If you are not careful, you will be poisoned and injured." Ji Tianqing nodded his head and memorized every word she said. The two of them walked around the herb garden for an entire afternoon, and with Xian Xian's help, Ji Tianqing memorized over 1,000 herbs. The two of them chatted as they walked, and their relationship became closer and closer, and they had already become friends. When evening came, Xian Xian wanted to return to her residence, and the two of them left the herb garden together. At the entrance of the herb garden, Xian Xian smiled and waved her slender little hand as she bid farewell to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stood on the tree-lined path and watched her figure disappear into the distance. A gentle smile appeared on his face. "It's really strange. I have only known Xian Xian for half a day and I have already hit it off with her. Seeing her leave, I still feel reluctant. How could this be?" He muttered in his heart as he could not understand. Although Xian Xian was extremely beautiful and had a gentle and graceful personality, he was not someone who was greedy for beauty and did not have any improper thoughts towards Xian Xian. The hazy feeling he had for Xian Xian was more like an older brother wanting to protect his younger sister. At the same time, he had some doubts in his heart and was secretly guessing Xian Xian's identity. Although Xian Xian did not reveal her identity, he could tell that Xian Xian's strength was not ordinary. She was definitely not an outer sanctum disciple, and was most likely an inner sanctum disciple. As for the inner disciples, they had to wear white robes, which was their identity. Unless it was someone with a special identity, one must not wear clothes of different colors. Therefore, Ji Tianqing dared to conclude that Xian Xian was most likely an inner sect disciple with a special identity. Forget it. Let's not think about so much nonsense. Junior sister Xian Xian and I hit it off well, and I just want to be friends with her. Why should I investigate her identity? After letting his imagination run wild for a while, Ji Tianqing collected his thoughts and followed the tree-lined path back to the storm courtyard. After he returned to his residence, the odd-job worker Xiao Feng brought him dinner. The amount of dinner was the same as yesterday, but the dishes and meat soup had been changed. After Ji Tianqing finished his dinner, he sat in his room and closed his eyes to rest, preparing to cultivate after calming his heart. However, he sat there for half an hour, and Xian Xian's figure and smiling face appeared in his mind from time to time, making it difficult for him to calm down. He had no choice but to sit in front of the desk by the window, holding the 1,000 medicine collection and carefully reading it, memorizing the contents. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. At this time, it was already the middle of the night, and the storm courtyard was silent. Ji Tianqing was engrossed in reading the book when he suddenly frowned and subconsciously raised his head to look outside the window. His 5 senses were very sharp, and he faintly felt as if there was a pair of eyes secretly watching him. The feeling of being secretly watched made his heart uneasy, making it difficult for him to calm down. He quickly put down the 1,000 medicine collection and reached out to open the window. Swish! In the dark night outside the window, on the roof not far from him, there was a black shadow flashing. Sure enough, there is someone secretly watching. Ji Tianqing suddenly frowned, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He immediately grabbed the black dragon sword at the head of the bed, jumped out of the window, and ran in the direction of the black shadow. The black shadow waved his hand and shot a cold light at him, and the figure immediately disappeared into the darkness. Whoosh! The cold light made a sharp sound and went straight for Ji Tianqing's face, bringing with it a fierce energy. Ji Tianqing immediately waved his sword to block, and with a ding sound, he blocked the cold light and sent it flying to the ground. At this time, he clearly saw that the cold light was a hidden weapon flying knife. Damn it! You want to sneak attack me? Ji Tianqing secretly cursed, and his heart was full of doubts. He ran out with all his strength, wanting to catch the black shadow and see who wanted to sneak attack him. However, when he chased out of the storm courtyard, he found that the black shadow had disappeared into the forest. Ji Tianqing was unwilling to give up, and he chased into the forest with the black dragon sword, looking around with a sharp gaze. However, after searching for a while, he couldn't find any trace of the black shadow, and could only return without success. After returning to his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and pondered with a frown. That person was secretly spying on me, and after I discovered him, he used a hidden weapon to sneak attack me. However, he didn't dare to make a move in the storm courtyard. Clearly, he didn't want to reveal his whereabouts and identity. In that case, this person must be from the Sky Pillar sect, and he is much stronger than me. It is very likely that he is a Tongxian realm expert. But I just arrived at the Sky Pillar sect, and I haven't made any enemies. Who wants to deal with me? Ji Tianqing pondered and analyzed for a long time, but he didn't have a clue. After a quarter of an hour, he calmed down and entered the secret room to cultivate. Yesterday, when he entered the sect, Deacon Duwu gave each person a book of the green pine art. This was the Sky Pillar sect's entry cultivation technique. Ji Tianqing had studied this cultivation technique and found that it was only a high-grade origin-level cultivation technique. Although this cultivation technique had been passed down by the Sky Pillar sect for 1,000 years and had been tempered thousands of times, it was already very perfect. If he cultivated this cultivation technique, his martial foundation would be incomparably solid. However, after Ji Tianqing read it, he threw the green pine art aside and had no plans to cultivate it. To him, the path of the sword heart was the most suitable and the most wonderful cultivation technique. He made up his mind to cultivate the 3rd level of the path of the sword heart and strive to reach the Tongxian realm within half a year. The next morning, Ji Tianqing finished cultivating and walked out of the secret room. He had just finished washing up and was about to go to the spirit herb garden to find Xian Xian when he walked out of the room with the 1,000 medicine collection. At that moment, the bell rang in the conference hall. Ji Tianqing stopped and hurriedly rushed to the conference hall with the disciples in the courtyard. After everyone gathered in the conference hall, they saw 3 black-robed deacons standing in the hall. 2 of them were Han Xiusheng and Du Wu. As for the other middle-aged deacon, Ji Tianqing did not recognize him. The unfamiliar deacon's face was a little gloomy, and his eyes were filled with anger as he looked at Ji Tianqing and the others. Everyone felt that the atmosphere was not right, so they stood in the conference hall with a solemn expression and did not dare to make a sound. Han Xiusheng's gaze swept across everyone and he said in a low and serious tone, "The day before yesterday, when I asked you to learn how to identify medicinal herbs, I said that you could enter the spirit herb garden, but you must not pluck a single flower or fruit from the garden. Yesterday, apart from Shi Jingqing and Emo, the other 8 of you entered the spirit herb garden. However, someone violated the sect rules and plucked a white sun fruit without permission. Deacon Mu, who is in charge of the spirit herb garden, is here. If any of you secretly plucked the white sun fruit, stand up and admit your guilt now." Only then did everyone understand what was going on. They looked at the people around them with a puzzled expression, secretly guessing who would steal the herb. Deacon Mu also shouted with a gloomy face, "The white sun fruit is a precious spirit herb. It only blooms once every 10 years and bears fruit once every 20 years. As disciples of the Fengyun Hall, someone actually plucked the white sun fruit without permission. This is a disgrace to the Fengyun Hall. I'll give you a chance. Whoever plucked the white sun fruit, stand up and admit your guilt. I can give you a lighter punishment. Otherwise, when I find you, you will be severely punished." All the disciples looked at each other and whispered in each other's ears, but no one stood up and admitted their guilt. Ji Tianqing was also puzzled, but he looked on quietly as usual. Seeing that no one took the initiative to admit their guilt, Han Xiusheng ordered, "Deacon Du, accompany Deacon Mu to search the rooms of the 8 disciples." Du Wu nodded and left the conference hall with Deacon Mu to search the rooms. It's a new week. Looking for recommendation tickets and rewards, please brothers. Chapter 100. The atmosphere in the hall was very stifling. Han Xiusheng sat at the head of the table with lowered eyelids, his face full of anger. All the disciples were inexplicably nervous, quietly waiting for the result. Only Shi Jingqing and Emo, who were proficient in Pill Dao, had not been to the spirit herb garden yesterday. Therefore, the 2 of them were relaxed, without any psychological burden. The 2 of them sized up Ji Tianqing, Nie Hao, and the other disciples. Their eyes were filled with disdain. After a quarter of an hour, Du Wu and Deacon Mu returned to the hall. In Deacon Mu's hand was a white spirit fruit with a hint of red. It was the white sun fruit. Du Wu glanced at Ji Tianqing, then walked to Han Xiusheng's side and whispered a few words. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing's heart could not help but thump, faintly having a bad premonition. Sure enough, Han Xiusheng also showed a surprised expression, glancing at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing. As a disciple of the Wind Cloud Hall, you disregarded the rules of the sect and privately picked the white sun fruit. Do you know your crime? Han Xiusheng's face was solemn, his tone cold as he asked. Ji Tianqing's face immediately changed, his tone firm as he said, "Deacon Han. Although the white sun fruit is precious, this disciple does not have the slightest bit of greed, let alone secretly pick it. There must be a misunderstanding, or there must be some other hidden story. I ask Deacon Han to investigate." Han Xiusheng's face was still cold, his tone low as he shouted, "Ji Tianqing. If you did not secretly pick the spirit herb, how could this white sun fruit appear in your room?" Ji Tianqing only felt baffled, immediately opening his mouth to explain, "Deacon Han, this is impossible. Someone must be framing me." Han Xiusheng frowned, shouting in a low voice, "Stop quibbling. There are witnesses and material evidence, how can you evade? Since you just entered the sect and this is your first offense, I punish you to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace for a month. Ji Tianqing immediately secretly clenched his teeth, his fists in his sleeves creaking. He knew that he was being framed, but he couldn't defend himself. He was punished by Han Xiaoxing to sweep the floor, but being ridiculed by others was secondary. More importantly, he was punished to sweep the floor for a month. This would delay his cultivation for a month. Anger surged in his chest, but he could only suppress it. He maintained a calm expression and said, "Disciple, obeys." After cupping his hands in greeting, he turned around and walked out of the hall. He left the storm courtyard and headed towards the Great Peace Palace to sweep the floor. Even though he was filled with humiliation, he knew that a lack of forbearance in small matters would spoil great plans. He absolutely could not be rash and impulsive. After Ji Tianqing left, Deacon Mu also took the white sun fruit and left. Han Xiaoxing reprimanded the disciples again before leaving the hall with Du Wu. After the deacons left, the few disciples who had been holding back their laughter finally began to chuckle and discuss. Hee, that Ji Tianqing is actually so stupid. He dared to violate the rules when he just entered the sect. His future is bleak. Hee, that kid was punished to sweep the floor for a month. Where would he have time to learn alchemy? In my opinion, in the alchemy assessment a month later, he will definitely be at the bottom. Shi Jingxing curled his lips and said with a face full of disdain, Ji Tianqing, that guy is still number 1 in the Azure Sky Kingdom's grand competition. He actually wants to steal a white sun fruit. He really hasn't seen the world. Emo revealed a mocking sneer, hee, after all, he came from a rundown small country like the Azure Sky Kingdom. He looks like a poor and greedy person. It's normal for him to steal things. When these words came out, Ji Ling and Nia Hao's expressions changed. Originally, when Ji Ling saw Ji Tianqing being punished in public, he was secretly sneering and gloating over his misfortune. Suddenly hearing Shi Jingxing and Emo's words, he also lost face. After all, these two people ridiculed the Azure Sky Kingdom as a rundown small country. He also came from the Azure Sky Kingdom and was even a prince of that country. Of course, he was also insulted. But Ji Ling only frowned and didn't have the intention to refute. Obviously, he was going to swallow his anger. But Nia Hao stepped forward and coldly glared at Shi Jingxing and Emo. He said in a cold tone, Shi Jingxing, Emo, you two are singing the same tune to slander Ji Tianqing and criticize others behind their backs. Aren't you too petty? We are all disciples of the Wind Cloud Courtyard. Don't you feel ashamed to ridicule your fellow disciples? Nia Hao was born in a family of generals and was also the descendant of Marshal Qian Kuan. Since young, he was raised to be hot-blooded, upright, and kind. In addition, he had dealt with Ji Tianqing before. The two of them were friends. At this time, of course, he would fight for his friend. Shi Jingxing and Emo were complacent when they were suddenly scolded by Nia Hao. Their faces sank and they angrily glared at Nia Hao. Hee, we are talking about Ji Tianqing. What does it have to do with you, Nia Hao? Besides, we don't want to be senior brothers with dirty hands like Ji Tianqing, who is a scoundrel who steals chickens and dogs. That's right. Nia Hao, you are defending Ji Tianqing. Are you with him? Nia Hao angrily glared at them and firmly shouted, Brother Ji and I are friends. I know his character very well. He would never do such a thing. I believe he has been wronged. Shi Jingxing and Emo were even more complacent and laughed contemptuously. Ha ha ha, this is really funny. The two deacons found the white sun fruit in his room. The facts are all there. You still want to help him quibble? Aya, snakes and rats really belong to the same nest. Birds of a feather flock together. Forget it, forget it. Let's not lower ourselves to Nia Hao's level. In the future, we should stay away from him and Ji Tianqing. The two of them talked for a while and left with a sneer on their faces. The other disciples looked on coldly as if this matter had nothing to do with them. Nia Hao coldly snorted and didn't say anything. He had already seen that most of these disciples were selfish and didn't want to be friends with anyone. In his heart, only Ji Tianqing was worthy of trust and could be a good friend. But he couldn't help but have some doubts and sighed, Brother Ji, you just entered the sect. Who did you offend to be framed? In an antique study room, Han Xiuxing was sitting at the table flipping through books and dealing with sect matters. Du Wu stood at the side and hesitated for a moment before asking, Brother Han, today's matter, you and I both know that Ji Tianqing was framed. Why do you still want to punish him? Han Xiuxing put down the book and his bronze face revealed a smile as he said, Previously, I was in charge of the Imperial Azure Kingdom's entrance examination and tournament. So I am not unfamiliar with Ji Tianqing. At first, this child was unconscious and carried to participate in the examination. He only had the strength of the third level of the body refinement realm. In the end, he became a joke to the people. A month later, this kid recovered to the true element realm and passed through the illusory armament mystic formation. He obtained a spot in the tournament and won first place in the tournament. I personally supervised the tournament and saw the scene of this kid winning first place. He is definitely a martial arts genius that is hard to come by in 100 years. If he is carefully nurtured, his future will be limitless. Hearing these words, Du Wu was even more puzzled and asked, Brother Han, since that is the case, why do you still want to punish him? Han Xiuxing's smile was somewhat playful as he explained, a flower that doesn't go through wind and frost will always be delicate. A baby eagle that is protected by its mother eagle will never be able to spread its wings and soar. Martial arts cultivation is the same. No expert will have a smooth journey. They will all experience bumpy tribulations. This time, I punished Ji Tianqing as a small punishment. I hope this kid will learn to be smarter in the future and not be unaware of being plotted against. The Sky Pillar sect is not a good place. If one only has martial arts talent but no brains, they will not be able to grow into an expert. Moreover, the reason why I punished him to sweep the floor of the Grand Peace Palace was for another reason. Could it be that you have forgotten that there is an old man who has not taken half a step out of the Grand Peace Palace for 20 years? Hearing the words, old man, Du Wu suddenly came to a realization. His eyes revealed a deep smile. I almost forgot about this. It seems that Brother Han has really put a lot of thought into this kid. However, whether or not he can obtain an opportunity in the Grand Peace Palace will depend on his own fortune. Chapter 101. Ji Tianqing followed the tree-lined path and walked more than 20 li before he found Graydon Palace. This palace was too remote. It was not on towering Sky Peak, but in a mountain behind towering Sky Peak. Graydon Palace was surrounded by lush forests. The forests were filled with tall trees with lush leaves. If one did not follow the limestone path to the peak of the mountain, it would be very difficult to see Graydon Palace. When Ji Tianqing came to the gates of Graydon Palace, he was stopped by a middle-aged man who was as tall as an iron tower. This middle-aged man's eyes were fierce. His face was covered in scars from blades and swords. He looked especially vicious and murderous. It was not an exaggeration to say that this middle-aged man could stop young children from crying at night. Young children would cry at a glance. But strangely, the middle-aged man was mute. Ji Tianqing showed his identity token to him and said that he had been punished to sweep the floor. After explaining for a long time, he was allowed to enter. After entering Graydon Palace, he walked in the ancient courtyards and silently examined the surroundings. Graydon Palace was too large. It almost took up the entire peak of the mountain. It was more than twice the size of the Ji Mansion. There were 4 courtyards in the palace. There were at least 1,000 rooms. But they were all empty. It appeared cold and quiet. Other than the mute man guarding the gates, Ji Tianqing walked around Graydon Palace and did not see anyone else. Also, the paths in the palace were covered in dust and leaves. There were also weeds growing on the sides of the paths. The door frames and the eaves of many rooms were covered in spider webs. All of Graydon Palace was quiet and desolate. It had not been cleaned for a long time. Ji Tianqing spent an hour walking around Graydon Palace and basically understood the layout of the palace. Then he found a broom and a bamboo basket and started to clean Graydon Palace. He first started to clean the first courtyard, using the broom to sweep the dust and leaves on the path. 2 hours passed. It was noon, but Ji Tianqing had not even finished sweeping the first courtyard. He did not even eat lunch and continued to sweep the dust and leaves. It wasn't until the afternoon that he finally cleaned the road. However, he still had to clear the cobwebs on the door frames and eaves, clean the dusty rooms, and pull out the weeds in the yard. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing felt tired. Cleaning the room was even more time-consuming, and he had to prepare tools such as a rag and a basin. Thinking of this, he decided not to clean the room. Instead, he entered the second courtyard and continued to clean the dust and fallen leaves on the road. Time passed quickly. Unknowingly, it was already evening, and the sun was about to set. Ji Tianqing looked at the bamboo basket that was as tall as a person. It was filled with dust and fallen leaves. However, he had only cleaned a small portion of the courtyard. If he wanted to clean the entire courtyard, he would have to work until late at night. The Great Peace Palace is so large, how long will it take me to finish cleaning the Great Peace Palace? Ji Tianqing felt a strong sense of powerlessness in his heart, and his mood became more and more angry and sullen. He simply threw the broom to the side and sat on the stone bench under the eaves of the corridor, wiping his sweat as he rested. Damn bastard. If I find out who framed me, I will ruthlessly take revenge on him. I entered the sky-bearing sect to cultivate the martial way, not to sweep the floor as an errand boy. If I delay for a month, I will fall behind the other disciples, damn it. The more Ji Tianqing thought about it, the angrier he became. His eyes burned with anger. At this time, the black dragon sword on his back suddenly moved twice. He frowned and asked in a low voice, "Little black dragon, what's wrong? Do you have something you want to say?" The little black dragon's voice came from the black dragon sword. It said in a low muffled voice, "Old Ji, if you keep cleaning like this, I'm afraid you won't be able to finish in half a month. I have a way to help you." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Oh? What method do you have?" "Watch me," the little black dragon said confidently. Then it flew out of the scabbard with a whoosh and flew to the center of the courtyard. It revealed its 3-meter-long flood dragon body and circled in the air above the courtyard, immediately stirring up a gust of wind. Ji Tianqing sat under the eaves of the corridor and watched with interest as it circled in the air. His face was filled with anticipation. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. As the little black dragon circled faster and faster, the gust of wind in the courtyard became more and more violent. Soon, the gust of wind became a hurricane. Ji Tianqing's eyes shone as he whispered, "This is a true hurricane." In the blink of an eye, the hurricane swept the dust and fallen leaves on the ground into the air. The entire courtyard was covered by the hurricane. Not only was the dust and fallen leaves on the ground, but even the weeds in the courtyard were uprooted and flew into the air to form a ball. Countless fallen leaves and weeds were mixed together, forming a ball the size of a room. The green and yellow ball was wrapped in the hurricane and constantly circled in the air. It looked very spectacular. Ji Tianqing was all smiles as he said in surprise, "This courtyard is full of fallen leaves and weeds. I'll need at least an entire day to clean it up. I didn't think that little black dragon would be able to clean up all the weeds and leaves in the blink of an eye. Truly inconceivable. Huh, the hurricane you created is truly a divine tool for cleaning." The little black dragon's voice came from the hurricane. It said with a smug tone, "Humph, of course. Although I'm very weak, a small matter like this can't stump me. Old Ji, just watch. I'll immediately help you clean up the courtyard." After saying this, the little black dragon's circling speed suddenly increased by 2 times. The hurricane's power also increased by 2 times, covering the entire courtyard and the room. The tiles on the roof could not withstand the huge pulling force and immediately flew into the sky with a walala sound. Not only that, but many of the herbs and trees planted around the courtyard were also affected by the hurricane. Countless herbs were uprooted and sent flying into the air like weeds. Those large trees were also swept up until they swayed violently. All of the leaves were swept away, flying into the hurricane. The dozen over large trees that were originally still lush with branches and leaves became barren in a blink of an eye. Not a single leaf was left. Ji Tianqing was instantly dumbfounded. After recovering his senses, he shouted with a face full of anxiety, "Little black dragon! Quickly stop! You used too much force and caused an accident." The little black dragon was currently flying with all its might. After hearing his shout, it then gradually slowed down its speed. But right at this time, at the courtyard's main entrance, an enraged roar of abuse suddenly sounded out. "Ah, ah! My azure spirit tree! The azure soul grass that I nurtured with great care! Which damned bastard ruined this old man's many years of painstaking effort?" Suddenly hearing this voice, Ji Tianqing immediately quivered and subconsciously looked towards the courtyard's entrance. Only to see a white-bearded old man in purple robes currently standing at the courtyard's entrance, staring fixedly at those barren large trees. He was so angry that his beard flew up. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.